Radio.
Hey, what's up, guys, and welcome to RealTuners Radio, episode 26. Tonight, our guest is Cale Aronson from Black Magic Clutches. These guys are awesome. They provide parts, service, tuning, and even training to a wide variety of customers, from street cars all the way up to NHRA and Mountain Motor Pro Stocks. These guys have a ton of knowledge and information to share with us, and we're definitely looking forward to it. We also got our usual panel of hosts ready to take your questions on Facebook, Mixler, and now our YouTube channel, RealTuners, where we are streaming this event live.
Are you interested in taking a live in-person class with RealTuners? We teach EFI tuning classes all over the country and have opened up dates for early 2018 on our website for reservations. Classes are limited in size, so everyone gets all the attention they need. Cost is $550 per person for a 2-day course with live tuning of a high-performance street or track car. Our goal is to have you tuning your own project confidently and safely. We are adding classes for the year every day, so follow RealTuners LLC on Facebook or watch the schedule on our website at RealTuners.com. Currently scheduled classes are as follows. January 20th and 21st at KP Racing in Houston, Texas, our RealTuners EFI Essentials class for standalone EFI tuning. February 3rd and 4th will be at Trick Pro Motorsports in Melbourne, Florida, giving the EFI Essentials class. On April 7th and 8th, we're giving our first factory ECU tuning class at Shore Tuning just outside of Lexington, Kentucky. This class will fill up fast. Reserve your seat now at RealTuners.com. Also check out RealTuners.com for more details on this one. April 14th and 15th, we're giving a 2-day course specific to Holley HP and Dominator ECU tuning at the legendary 417 Motorsports, Blake Hughes' amazing fabrication shop in Springfield, Missouri. This will be another great class if you're wanting to master the Holley tuning. We recommend you make your reservations right away. April 28th and 29th, we'll be back in Lexington, Kentucky with James Short at Shore Tuning for our RealTuners EFI Essentials course. May 12th and 13th, we'll be in Detroit, Michigan at Full Throttle Speed for a 2-day EFI Essentials course, which covers all standalone EFI tuning. Remember to check back often. We'll announce the schedules weekly on the RealTuners Radio podcast, but we also update our website daily at RealTuners.com. Or follow RealTuners LLC on Facebook to keep up on our latest schedules. These classes tend to fill up fast, so we recommend you reserve your seats as soon as possible, and look forward to seeing you there. All right. How's everybody doing tonight? So that was our little pre-recorded intro we're just kind of playing around with. Made it a little bit easier to put all that stuff together. We have a huge list of classes going up on the schedule, adding a couple each day at this point. So check out RealTuners.com if you're interested in the classes. Get signed up for those as soon as you can. Get your seat reserved because they fill up pretty quickly. So... all right. Well, we got the guys on our normal chat, and we got a special guest tonight, Cale Aronson. That's going to be super cool. Rye, what's going on, man? Anything cool happening this week?
PRI was probably the biggest news, I think, going on this week. So I know a lot of our guys were there. A bunch of new products came out there, and they've been kind of all over the place. I thought the really cool one, we had him on the show a couple weeks ago, Dave Vassar from Nitrous Outlet. He talked about it on our show. And then he finally showed the pictures of the Kraken, the nitrous plate, single plate that pretty much doubles as a fogger. That thing is awesome. Can't wait to see that thing out being put to the use.
Anybody else see any cool stuff? Bueller?
Well, it was about 4 square blocks full of cool stuff. Where would you like me to start?
New stuff. Or was that your first PRI trip?
Holley's got an 8-channel injector driver box now they're going to be releasing.
My question is why? What is that for?
Probably because they want to make it so people can drive 8 more injectors sequentially.
Okay.
Or give it to guys who want to do guys with blowers that need to do some extra injectors up in the hat and down below, and
I need to understand
places that need to be.
I need to understand what their driver current limitations are. I guess something I just need to go find out or read the manual on my own.
They said they built it for big injectors, like they made it to be an 8.2 driver, so you can drive like 700 billet atomizers.
Gotcha.
Yeah, they said that was the reason why they developed it, was for the big. They said the big atomizers needed them to run.
Now, is this an auxiliary controller that is in addition to the internal drivers?
We got to get somebody on here. We need to get Ricky
Totally
Best on here.
standalone. You can completely standalone. You feed it with your crank signals and cam signal, and it's got 8 injector driver outputs and plug and play.
Interesting. I was wondering if it was picking that up, from the actual crank sensor itself, or if it was CAN bust over or something from like a Dominator or something.
Straight wired in.
They aren't doing a bunch of data on CAN bus except for Race Pack, is all I've seen. I wish they would open that up too. Come on, Holly. Let us talk to more stuff on
I think
CAN
they're
bus.
still working on making all that stuff copacetic and making it really smooth.
Yeah, I mean, at some point it's just going to get complicated, but it's good to have. Oh, man, it's cold up here in the Omaha area. Holy balls, it's cold up here tonight.
Hey, other stuff that went on at PRI, I don't know. I think a lot of people listening, and I know we talk about this almost every week ad nauseum, but Hot Rod did announce the dates and locations for Drag Week 2018, and I'm super stoked.
There in the East.
That's
going to be cool.
Backyard,
Yep,
so.
I bet you a bunch of class records are going to fall if they're out in the East Coast. They're going to get some fast guys to show up for that. You watch.
I think it's going to add a real element, though, as hot as it's going to be in Atlanta in September.
Yeah, it is. You're right. But I mean, those guys are fast out there, man. That could be interesting stuff to see. Doug, are you guys going to go back? Are you going to go all the way out there?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm actually drawing up plans tonight for my trailer for next year.
Sweet. Well, shit. Talk to Eric Yost, or Blake Hughes, man. Those guys both have awesome trailers that are real functional.
Blake's is badass.
Yeah. Speaking of Blake, in the intro, did I hear you call him legendary?
Legendary. He is.
Oh my
he's
God! Really?
Legendary.
You went there. You went there.
You got to pause.
Takes me to a nice
legendary.
Legendary, dude.
That big old noggin, man.
Man, he's not going to be able. Man, Danny is going to be so pissed. He's not going to be able to walk through the front.
She's not going to be pissed because I'm going to take him out to dinner to smooth it over for all the times I bug him when I know like they're out to doing something or whatever. So Danielle's going to be fine with that. We'll go to a nice dinner somewhere. I like to eat. I always make him take me to some place like good.
Cody's going to have to open the bay door to let him in the shop in the mornings now.
Doesn't he already? Oh no, that's right. We're all on that diet challenge, the 417 fat ass challenge or whatever. And I'm pretty much gonna have to barf up a lung to like catch up with some of those guys at this point. But we've got till the first of the year. But anyway, we all paid in $25. I don't know where it's going, but not to me.
Blake is listening on Facebook. He says the legend is here. Oh Lord.
Oh God.
Here we go.
Just should have shut up here. I'm just gonna rewind it. No, we're doing a class at Blake's again, a Holly specific class. That's one to go to. His class is one of the coolest ones last year, so going to do it specifically for Holly this time. And I'm sure he'll have something super cool to test. That was the first one where we were testing the inlet air temp horsepower at the wheel differences and getting that 1.5 to 2 horse per degree Fahrenheit number. And then later we did a little bit of that with Barry Cook. Kind of knew what our temps were and for a given boost, and we were seeing the same thing. So there's always something cool at those guys' classes.
There should be, when it comes to intercoolers and stuff, I'm gonna let the cat out of the bag a little bit. There'll be something new for you to test by the time that class.
I hope so. He's got a couple of things. I was like, I hope he's gonna have something for me with that. Usually Blake actually provides the vehicle, or he times it so that he's got something for us to tune, go hit the track for the weekend or whatever. But,
yeah, it might be on the Sonoma, but we'll have something new for you on
that. Is fine. That is fine.
Checking.
They don't really need my help. Those guys are good tuners on stuff. It's a fun thing to do the class. He likes to help his local guys get up to speed so that you don't got to, babysit everybody's single car or whatever. But it's kind of a neat deal. I like the classes down there, and we have fun. We like down there. I used to live down there, not too far from him, about 45 minutes from him. It's pretty country. It's in the Ozarks. We were on Table Rock Lake. It's pretty. Drinking my hot cocoa tonight. I don't know what you guys are drinking. I need to pour something else in this hot cocoa. But
Crystal Light.
Flavor water.
I jumped on the bandwagon with you, John. I haven't had the soda either. So
in like 20 minutes?
Let's see. Like day 6 now.
Awesome.
No soda.
That's awesome.
So
it's a struggle.
It's not as bad as I thought it was going to be quite honest with you. I've gone through like 2 cases of 16-ounce waters in 6 days. But
wow.
the Crystal Light has got like the Crystal Light with caffeine. And instead of doing the energy drinks, I'll just use those in the morning and then just the regular ones during the day. And so far, no headaches and no issues. So it's worked out pretty well.
Everybody who's wondering what Crystal Light and not drinking soda has to do with your race program, it's called shaving weight.
Yeah, man. It's better to shed weight than it is to try and add power.
Hey, I got 2 tenths to pick up. I got to do something.
You guys talk for 30 seconds. I'm dialing up Kale now on our fancy cell phone dealy.
I got a couple 100 pounds to offset from going from an LS to a big block.
Big block or the Hemi? You talking about the Supra, or what are you talking about with the big block? Oh, the Mustang. Never mind.
Yeah, the Mustang. I got a couple 100 pounds to offset now.
Yeah, you and Delgado kind of sound a little bit alike. I was confused about who was talking.
It's going to be hanging weight in the rear of the car on that one. Hey, check it out.
Yeah, I'm going to be trying to figure a way to get there.
We got Kale on the phone, you guys, from Black Magic. What is up, Kale?
Not much, just hanging out listening to you guys.
Cool. We can hear you loud and clear, man. That's going to work good. Okay, so, well, I mean, we got it was just kind of a whim. We asked you to get on here because people were saying, hey, a couple guys said, hey, you should talk to a clutch guy. I'm like, well, I totally know some that are actually, you don't live too far from me. We're like 2 hours away or less.
Right,
yeah. And your name came up. And so I just put that thing out this morning and I probably got more feedback than I think I've ever gotten so far. So huge expectations, dude. If you absolutely don't blow us away, well, that's going to suck.
I'll do the best I can. I don't want to raise the bar too high, but I'll say this. The good thing about, talking about clutches and stick shift is, we actually drive the car instead of just riding the car. So, one of those things. So,
oh, is this going to be one of those nights? Great. Well, Dusty Bradford has been pushed back to next week, ladies and gentlemen. We'll catch him later. Oh no, I only recently got experience with clutch tuning at approaching the level you guys work at. I worked on Dave Rivers' Pro Stock car this last 2 seasons. And then I learned pretty much there that the clutch guy is the real star of the show as far as the tuning goes. Just so long as I was giving that guy kind of like a power level and he knew how much I was going to change it or whatever, or, we'd kind of agree on whatever launch RPMs, that kind of stuff. But the clutch guy, man, that was where the real work goes in on making those things, squeezing the last little bit out of every incremental on those cars. Can you give us a little background? How did you get started in this? It's a family thing for you. So I'd start from the top, take all the time you need. We got 2 hours if you need.
Oh man, you get me here all night. No, most people know, I'm a second generation Pro Stock kid. I got dumped out on my head in the shop, and my dad being an old, basically he was one of the guys who was racing mountain motor Pro Stock basically from its inception. And we go way back. My dad was John Causey's first customer after he stopped doing stuff with Dyno Don, went out on his own. So I've kind of been around it my whole life, and that was kind of the same thing. I realized really early on that it's like you can work on the horsepower all day, and don't get me wrong. I mean, most of the 500-inch guys, I always joke, they spend all their time working on the hood scoop holder, but there are parts that work behind it, and I think a lot of times people break down incrementals with people, and they watch what the 500-inch guys are doing, or the mountain motor, or even some of the Aussie Pro Stock guys, and they go, man, they got the mile an hour, but they're not E10, and that's usually whenever that there's you're not maximizing the efficiency of the entire combination. And kind of to bring up what you said there, with tuning with stuff that's a power adder application, whether it be turbos, nitros, supercharger, whatever you're doing, you're exactly right. It's one of those things where when I talk to people about, tuning, say a dedicated drag car, let's say it's got a turbo, most guys are used to sitting there and all they want to do is, tune basically off of a boost controller,
right,
timing, this, that, and the
turn
other.
the screw up or down. Yep.
Right. And for us, I'm like, no, leave it, give me a consistent power level. Let's bring it in the same way. I'm going to use gear ratio, suspension, clutch, and all that to manipulate that. And then as we get to the point in which we see we could get a little bit more, then we'll give it a little bit more, and you just kind of work into it. And you get the max efficiency out of your combination before you try to give it more. And growing up, Kazi always told me, he said, the guys that go out there, and keep in mind, we're talking, 20 plus years ago, is, said all the guys that just throw turbos on them and go out and go fast, he said, they kind of haven't really earned the right to go that fast yet. And, it wasn't really a dig. It was more like they just didn't know, in other words, it's easier to add the horsepower than it is to get the maximum potential out of your car.
Man, our guys say it all the time. Turbocharging is the easy button. Power adders are the easy button for that stuff. And I'm going to agree with you 100%, man. That's I've seen what the clutch tuning can do. We'll just leave everything else alone, make solid power that's reliable, and let the clutch guy figure out the incrementals and the gear ratios and everything else. And it works, man. I mean, when you're really at the level where you're trying to squeeze out that last couple tenths of a percent of performance everywhere, then that becomes a primary role on a car like that.
Right. And really one of our biggest things, the thing I spend most of my time talking to my customers on the phone with, I'm really well known. Most of my guys will tell you, you get me on the phone, it's probably going to be.
I had 3 guys warn me, like, he's going to go 2 hours, dude. Just so you know.
And that's me. And well, when you're actually discussing a specific combination, I mean, it's really kind of a thing where I tell everybody I talk to, I say, and this isn't me digging on any, the small clutch companies or, tech guys or this, that, or the other that, have been around it a little bit. I said, it's not me having arrogance. It's just, I was actually talking to Ricky Smith yesterday. We're kind of talking about the same thing. As you do this your whole life. And like I told Ricky, I said, there's a reason he's always done so good in Pro Mod. And at the same thing, I tell the same thing to all the other nitrous guys. I go, the reason Ricky, kind of whoops up on you guys is because he comes from Pro Stock world.
He's been through the ranks of maximizing every little detail.
Right. Yeah. And so it's really, really important from our perspective, whenever you get somebody on the phone, I always say, if you call somebody and you're asking about clutch advice or technology, there's always going to be somebody out there trying to sell you smoke, snake oil, whatever.
Yeah.
It really boils down to one simple fact is you can't, if anybody gets you ever get somebody on the phone and the only thing they're talking about is horsepower, weight, and the clutch itself, and they don't ever ask anything about the type of suspension you're running, their gear ratios, or how much bite the car has in it, things like that. What kind of RPM are we turning? What kind of acceleration rate does the engine have? Until you get into all those things, you really can't properly pick something because, it's a thing where if you have too much gear ratio, not enough gear ratio, too much tire size, whatever, the gear splits aren't, going to let the engine fall where it needs to, or it's not going to accelerate right down low. That everything that's behind the clutch is what really dictates the amount of load that the clutch sees, which is what makes your window small or large when it comes to being able to tune. So, that's a really important fact. And a lot of guys for so many years, in what I want to call more of the sportsman ranks, they're used to what everybody is used to seeing as like a long style type clutch, a 3-lever stamp steel cover type deal.
Right.
They're so used to those that they would buy them from, say, a McLeod or Ram or whatever, just an off the shelf, basic unit. And they were, they worked great for what they were doing there, but they were, when they started putting data loggers on them, and that's, 10, 15 years ago, maybe 5-10% of the clutch cars had data loggers. Now I'd say you're probably up 60-70% of them have them. And they've learned so much simply because they've realized that the way they were running them before, they ran a lot of base pressure. And I mean, for people that aren't clutch people, base pressure is static, meaning if it was a diaphragm clutch, it means that's how much, pressure there is regardless of the RPM that you have. We use counterweight to come in with RPM. So if you're going to slip the clutch down low, you've got to be very counterweight dependent, meaning you don't want a lot of initial static base load pressure there. You want it to gain more clamping load as the RPM gains.
Right. So there's two places that the clamping load comes from. It's the base and the increasing clamping load from the counterweights, right?
Right, correct.
And we're basic here. You might have to explain stuff like slowly for us torque converter hillbillies over here.
Oh, yeah. I understand. I mean, when you play with a slush box too long, I mean, I know it can be contagious, so, but I mean.
I had to go to the doctor.
You got to have it, yeah.
You get a shot.
You got to have, a converterectomy, but it's
46 listeners, 44, 40, 31. No, I'm kidding.
But no, I mean, I say this. I've had a lot of people that for so long, the biggest problem, and I've noticed the clutch stuff has really started to have a lot of resurgence in the last couple of 3 years.
It has.
And what I've really noticed by that is we got a lot of the guys, like back, the East Coast, you've got UMTR, the Pro Stick series, you got the Southern Gear Jammers, you got Mountain Motors, the Ozark Super Shifters.
Those guys are huge around here. Ozark Mountain Super Shifters, yeah.
Right. and you got the mountain or the Rocky Mountain super shifters. Now we got the BC super shifters up, like Canada, Washington area. It's growing a lot, and a lot of it has to do, it's something, and there's a reason I always called my company Black Magic when I started doing tuning and doing my own stuff. And a lot of people don't know, I do design work and development and, stuff for all these different clutch companies and all this different stuff. And it was always kind of like, they're like, how do you fit in? I'm like, well, I'm kind of the guy behind the scenes. I said, but I really kind of wanted to, the reason I chose Black Magic, the reason I've always called it that is I'm teaching something. I like to teach people. I'm not, in years past, 10 or 15 years ago, the clutch companies didn't like to educate their public. So
right. Hard to find out how the hell or what the hell you want to do with them, especially if you're new at it.
Right. I mean, partially it was because there was only maybe 3 or 4 of them, meaning the owners, the developers, this, that, and the other, that really, and I'll throw a name out, would be someone like maybe a Pat Norsha, who owns Ram, who I'm good friends with. Pat's tuned Mountain Motor Pro Stock cars. He's been around. He knows it. But he's a lot like me to a degree, but he's running a company that's making a lot of parts. So he doesn't have the time to spend on the phone, with everybody. I've kind of, I guess you'd say, aligned myself to a point where I can do a lot of the design work, this, that, and the other, but I'm not worried about day-to-day production. I'm not worried about the boxes being the right shape, color, and dimension. There's a lot that goes into having to run a company that's doing that much work. So,
right.
It's hard to do that, but I've noticed that the more that we teach, the more people are becoming more comfortable with it. The only thing that you get once in a while is you get guys that say, I really don't want to work on it between rounds. I want to go out and run, I want to run 60, 80 runs, and I don't want to take the clutch out. I don't want to even get underneath the thing, this, that, and the other. And it's kind of like, and this isn't me wanting to be smart ass, so to speak. It's just really me saying, there's a difference between somebody that just wants to go have a toy and there's a person who wants to challenge themselves.
No, you're talking maximum effort, but maximum reward here. It's an effort that you put in to achieve another level with a car, with the program.
And, somebody here in our neck of the woods, I mean, I'll say this, we developed, what I call my next gen clutch. We developed it several years ago. The prototype went out. One of the first ones that ever went into, James Smith drives 2 of Leonard Long, who owns G-Force's cars. He won the last 2 back-to-back Pro Stick championships with the prototype, and it's one of those things where, I think he put 450 runs on the thing before he replaced heat shields. He might have went through 6, 8 discs. I don't know, but he's running low 8s, all day, every day with a small block Ford, with a, nice car. But probably one of my things I'd say that I didn't know, it's going to sound bad. I'm not a bracket guy. I'm not going to lie, but I always tell my guys, I go, bracket racing and heads up racing and pro stock level is actually very similar, because I say, when you look at pro stock cars, whether it be mountain motor, whether it be 400 inch, 500 inch, whatever, when they go to the starting line, they're pretty much going to run within 100th of their, every single time, unless the air changes dramatically.
Yeah, or something really goes wrong. Yeah.
Right. So, if you run your car for maximum potential, you tend to be very consistent. And we had somebody this year, it's something we kind of took on. It was a little bit different. I'm really proud of what he did, which is Tim Nicholson. He's here in our neck of the woods, I guess you'd say. He's in Kansas.
Yep.
But, he won the Division 5 Super Gas Championship, and Rob Park, which is Division 5 director, and him and Bob Blackwell they were both calling me and saying, "Hey, Kale, your boy won 2 back-to-back races." And I'm like, "Yeah, cool." I didn't think nothing of it. And then they said, "Well, he won the championship." And I was kind of like, scratching my head going, "Okay." And they said, "Well, no one's ever won Super Gas Championship with a stick." And I'm like, "Really?" I was like, "Well, I hadn't really thought about it." And so, I was really glad, Tim pulled that off and did a really good job. And it's just a thing where when you go at things properly, there's a lot to be gained. And, it's a lot. I've even been looking at some of the Pro Nitrous guys here recently. We've been looking at, on how many gears, they're running, what their gear splits are. There's, for a long time, a lot of them have really left a lot on the table. And it's because they're using the horsepower to gain it. They're like I said, they've had that 500 inch mentality of throw more money at the engine, get more horsepower. Don't worry about what's behind it. And, there's a lot more to be had behind it. So, then we get into the clutch guys that are running, I know a couple of my customers, I think, are watching or listening tonight, and that run classes like NMRA has the Coyote stock class, which is it's incredibly
super competitive. I know, right? It's one of the most fun ones to watch. The Coyote stock class, that's badass, and it's a bunch of similar combos, but it's a really tight group. So
exactly, and it's the only thing and I hope some of the NMRA, NMCA guys are listening. They're rules guys, like say, have been talking back and forth, and we're all hoping the production, everybody from Leonard Long to me to basically Pat Norsha, all the clutch and transmission manufacturers and everybody and all the racers are hoping they're going to let those guys loose and get away from diaphragm clutches and let them actually have an adjustable clutch. But
come on, guys, do it. Let them do it, and they'll hear it, man. Spread the word if you guys know any of the rules makers. Actually, I freelance for NMCA for digital, writing articles for them. I'll put a good word in. Hell exactly.
Yeah. We got to get Raleigh. Like I say, Raleigh asked me, and I mean, it's one of those deals where I tell Steve, tell Raleigh, tell them all, but the whole point of it really is, explaining clutch technology to people is really not as complicated a lot of times as people think it is. And that's why I do my clutch tuning seminars that, nobody did them before I came along. And it was because, I don't just teach about a clutch. When you go to a seminar, it's 2 days. And everybody was always asking me, why 2 days? And usually by the second day, when they come in on the second day, they're like, I totally understand why it's 2 days now.
I don't mean to interrupt, but my input on that. So my classes, I'm doing EFI tuning classes. I've been doing these for 2 years now. And so 2 days. But he's like, why 2 days? I'm like, dude, because the end of the first day, you're just going to be like, man, I'm super confused. But midway, lunchtime, second day, you're going to be like, okay, I'm ready to get out of here and go do this on my own shit.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. That's what it takes. Yep.
You wake up with so many more questions that you're going to ask that, and not to be, I guess you'd say, not to talk down, but you're enlightened. All of a sudden, you're asking questions in a way that you didn't think to ask before.
Right.
And that's probably the biggest thing. And what I tell people is, I go, when you're taking this class, I don't want you to necessarily come away knowing everything about your specific combination. I want you to have a really good understanding of everything of how the clutch world works, meaning whether it be a diaphragm clutch all the way to the craziest billet or a lockup or whatever it may be. We're not going to spend all our time 100% on clutch stuff. We're also going to look at gear ratios. We're going to look at different types of suspension, shocks, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to show you how to, go through a race pack graph. And when they're done, I expect them to be able to walk into any, say, even a 500-inch, or a Mountain Motor Pro Stock, trailer, look at a race pack graph, and at least be able to make an intelligible decision to say, this thing probably needed a little bit more wheel speed, or needed, they may not be able to tell you exactly what it needed, but they know where it was lacking at.
For me personally, to understand what clutch guys were talking about, it went from years of gibberish and just whatever, dude, to when I started looking at data logs and started looking at race pack data. I'm like, oh, there's engine RPM, there's clutch speed. There's you compare you can see the slippage, you can do a math channel, real simple. It all kind of made sense. You guys like, you guy would show me, after this gear it's slipping for too long. I'd like to tighten that up. Okay, boom. Well, if it's an RPM related thing, then we add counterweight. It's just interesting, and it made me totally understand after starting to look at data logs. Very interesting that you guys teach classes on this. How often do you do these things? Do you got any schedule? Do you want to talk about it, man? Feel free to pump all the business that you like. We got all night.
We're actually looking right now. I've had a lot of my customers that either weren't able to make ones when I did them on the East Coast or whatever. And we had one of my customers I've actually had for a long time. Flew in from Hawaii. We get them. It's just they come from all over, and I like to have them here. At the shop or whatever, simply because I can show a lot more examples on parts, pieces, and everything. We keep everything here, and if you want to know how to put a G-force together, we can have a G-force here. If you want to know how to have a Liberty equalizer, there's one sitting on the shelf that Craig leaves here just for me to teach with. We got Linkos coming out the Gazoo pipe, as you can imagine.
Awesome.
We got every type of clutch there, and got the dyno there. It's one of those,
I'm probably going to hop in the car tomorrow and visit you guys. I've been telling you guys that for like 2 years, and I'm coming by there to visit, but that's I got to come check out the shop. I see the pictures, and I would check out their website. Was it blackmagicclutches.com?
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. And they got pictures of stuff they do on there, and it's pretty badass. Your photo galleries are really cool. You got pictures of neat stuff.
And I mean, really, what we try to
teach
do,
people how to push out a pilot bearing with grease or bread.
Oh man, I can tell you stories of pilot bearings that would not come out. That when we get them, oh my God, I'll never forget Kazi and me sitting down there one time, and I mean, I think it was literally, like one of those deals where when you're working with John Kazi and it's an hour later and you don't have a bearing out of the back of a crankshaft, you're literally sitting there kind of looking at it going, I just think we're going to put a new crank in it at this point.
Jeez.
I was like, this is getting bad. But, of course, the wizard, Kaz in terms of that type stuff. Next thing I know, it's out. No big deal. But,
yeah.
But the funniest thing about it, yeah, exactly. I can tell you this funny story. Racing at Eddyville, Iowa, which anyone in our area knows about.
House of Hook, man. Yep.
And I never forget. I'd never been there. Let me say the phrase this. I had never raced there. I'd been there as a kid growing up with my dad in pro stock, this, that, and the other. I probably hadn't been there for, 15 years when I went back in 2005. Went up there with my Outlaw 10.5 car, which was like a 700-inch, Kazi motor deal, back half skinny kid car on 10.5s. And, the Liberty 5-speed, all that. Had a 888-inch clutch in it. And, I mean, the thing would run, in the 8th mile, it'd run 450s pretty much all day long, about 2,900 pounds. And I went up there, and, of course, other than the fact that I had totally was oblivious to the fact that in the shutdown area, I was going to start doing a circle track loop at the end. That actually wasn't the biggest surprise of the weekend. It was actually the pilot bearing that previously we had not been able to get out of the back of the crank. The new one, it decided it wanted to leave completely 100% on its own. After the burnout. And so I went ahead and made the run. And it actually decided to let all the ball bearings go and end up between all the discs. And I ran it out through 4th gear. And I'll just say this, I definitely welded every clutch plate together that I could. She was bucking and a carrying on, but yeah, like I say, it's one of those deals where whatever you had to do to get it to the stripe, that's all that mattered. So, but yeah, like I said, I figured if all the parts, all the things that I have to fix, I'm the clutch guy. I'm like, I can fix that, so.
Yeah,
but,
had it covered. Nice.
Exactly.
Nice.
So,
right.
But we've been looking at doing our, some more seminars. We just did one back, actually, I guess it was in June was the last one we did. We usually try to do 2 or 3 a year. We've been a little bit slowed down simply, of course, of, me having to go turtle, break my neck, and slow my whole entire life down. But that being said, I'm, it's one of those things where I loved when my doctor looked at me and says, you got the rest of your life to work. You need to focus on getting better. And I just asked him, I said, you want paid, don't you? And his
get me fixed. Yeah, that's funny.
Oh yeah. So if we're getting back to where, doing that. And I've had a lot of people ask me about doing more seminars. I'm going to try to do something probably late January or February sometime, here at the shop. Probably one of those deals where it works a lot better because, it's okay if I travel and I go somewhere. And I always encourage people if they have, if they got 5-10 people, in an area that want to set up.
Put one together. Yeah, that's how we do ours. Yep.
It's just, hey, let me know. If you got some guys that want to do it, let me know. We'll figure it out and we'll make it work, both financially and, logistically and time frames. One thing is, of course, I look like a pro stock gypsy, me and Tinsy going down the road with, enough clutch parts, transmission parts to, basically, tune every car on the planet. But at the same time, it's a good experience. And I really, I will say this. Most people don't really know. I work with almost all the clutch companies, basically. And, we're going to have examples there. We're going to have brand new stuff. We're going to have used stuff. We're going to have, heat shields where they can see anything and everything in terms of what it works. I mean, whether it be an off-the-shelf McLeod piece or a Ram piece or a Bonifani or an Ace or whatever, we're going to have them. Even hell, we do a lot of stuff for all my Aussie Pro Stock guys. I usually show a lot of that because it's really easy to wrap your head. For most of my guys, really easy to wrap their heads around the Aussie Pro Stock stuff. In terms of like race pack graphs, the way that we tune the clutches, what we're trying to do, because they are very similar to a lot of my guys who are like stocker, super stock type stuff, meaning that they're it's hard to keep the engine making power in terms of accelerating.
Right.
We're gear, we're challenged by our gear ratios. We got to keep the car moving. We can't allow the acceleration rate, to ever slow. So, we spend a lot of time showing that, but that allows them to get hands on with things. They can if they want to take them apart, look at them, touch them, feel them, smell them, I guess, lick them, whatever it takes to make them understand it. But, at the end of the day, you're going to go through most people to really break down clutch tuning. I mean, I guess you'd say clutch ratios, everything is for us. The way we look at it is when you go to the racetrack and you're a converter racer, you kind of go and I'm not saying that, the newer, greater stuff, you got the new lockup converters, you've got you got stuff that you can change, you can go in and rebuild them. You can, basically, I guess you'd say you can
do some tuning. Yeah.
But it's a lot of work to take a converter out of the car and basically know exactly what you want and make it do what you want. It's basically kind of like one of those things. For the most part, you may have 3 or 4 or 5 different converters, and they may or may not be exactly what you want, versus we're going to look at the correction factor. We're going to look at the track. I can determine how much wheel speed I want to have at any point throughout the run.
No, I mean, you guys are even doing the power and torque management applied to the wheels. You know what I mean? It's kind of cool. Clutch Guy takes that over. It's like, I don't got to do any time-based timing stuff. I literally just got to make the engine make the power it's going to make as safe as I can. Not worry about anything else. And this guy is going to figure out what to do with it. And that is nice. It was nice to turn that over once I got to work with somebody that works at that level. So,
exactly. And it's like, I actually, it's funny you're talking about Dave River. It's kind of funny. I remember, I got to think when that was, back in 2014, I guess. I remember I was down, we were at one of the NHRA races. I think it was in St. Louis. And, it was kind of funny. I got to work with him, his son, his daughter a little bit. I went over, and it's kind of funny. And it was kind of a thing where, they don't get to make a lot of runs. I mean, as everybody knows, Dave's, he's a budget guy.
Yeah, he's a privateer. He's one of the best performing privateers after the EFI switch this last 2 seasons. He's done if you break him up of the privateer and the pro teams, he's done the best, I think, from any of the privateers.
Yeah. And the biggest thing it's hard to gain information in that type of a class when you don't either have one of 2 things: the money, the time, the ability to go out and make lots of test hits.
Yeah.
And you're relying on, say, your engine builder or maybe another team to feed you a little bit of information as far as where to be in the ballpark.
Right.
And, it's kind of a thing where I looked at him and he kind of said, hey, this is a ratio we got in, this, that, and the other. And I remember telling Dave, I'm like, you got everything else right. But, it's kind of as a deal where I'm like, for the power he was making, for the way his engine was accelerating, I'm like, you need to get these gear splits a little tighter down low. And that's going to help the clutch perform better. And, it's kind of one of those deals where it just was a thing where I'm privileged in an interesting way. And it's kind of a thing where most people don't see it, is I get to see race pack runs. I wouldn't even want to know how many race pack runs I look at in a week, or even, I don't know, say, big stuff or Motec or Holly. I don't know, all the different data loggers you can look at. But, I just say data that I look at in a given week. And I love when somebody calls me and go, hey, I talked to you 3 months ago. Do you remember talking to me? And blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you're going to have to start over, unless it's an ongoing customer. But by doing that, I've played with turbo stuff. I've played with the nitrous, I've blowered the naturally aspirated. And it's a thing where you basically get a really good understanding of how every different suspension is going to work, how a tire is going to work, what the bite of the car is going to do. And then you worry about ratios. You worry about, friction coefficient of the disc on applied pressure, all those types of things. And to really simplify a clutch, most people really I always tell them, I go, everybody gets so confused. And I just had this conversation with a customer the other day who really called me, and he was, probably, I spent 45 minutes with him and he was one of these guys that just was really asking me just to please explain to him what the benefits were of different disc material, because he's a street strip, drag week type guy. And, I told him, he said, one guy was going to recommend Kevlar disc. One guy's a carbon fiber. Then they say centered iron, and they say organic. And, they're like, well, what's all the differences? And, I tell everybody, I said, you really have to understand tuning a clutch is about 2 things. It's friction coefficient and applied pressure. If you increase the friction coefficient, you're going to have to apply less, applied pressure. And vice versa. If the friction coefficient, goes down, meaning it takes, it doesn't have as much grab in the disc material, et cetera, you're going to put more clamping load or pressure to be able to lock it up. So these different materials respond differently to different characteristics, whether it be how much, as they slip, do they get hotter, and does that make them grab more? Or
does that change their friction coefficient with temperature change? Yeah.
Yeah. And all that makes a big difference. So, all my guys that run diaphragm clutches, this, that, and the other. And of course, as I'm sure everybody here listening, I was listening to everybody talk about drag week. And, I've had one of my customers, Pat Meiker, great guy. He went out for the first time, been building the car for several years, and, big old body Chevelle, big Chevy with twin turbos making like 2,400 horsepower. we built him a billet clutch setup that he went out, it's almost the exact same clutch that I would run in the Mountain Motor Pro Stock car. Very, very similar. He put it out and went out and ran really good with it, went all the way through drag week with it. And, it was just one of those things where, you can go from wild to mild. There's a lot of different in-betweens. But really just understanding what the features of a clutch are and learning data logger. Once you realize that the clutch and the gear ratios and all that are basically doing nothing more than allowing you to control the amount of wheel speed that you have through at any given point throughout the run. Once you understand how that works, it allows you to look at two things. One is your wheel speed. The more important thing that most people totally forget about is ground speed. Ground speed is probably something that gets overlooked the most because in Pro Stock, it is a rule that we cannot measure ground speed. We cannot have a sensor in any shape, way, or form that tells us ground speed. We can't use traction control, anything like that. It's all straight across the board. You run it.
You get one speed sensor. It's on the drive shaft. That's it.
Yep, exactly. And if you learn ground speed with cars that are, horsepower challenged might be the best way to put it for their weight. I always tell people, they ask me that, they want to see a race pack graph that looks like nice, even, graph. Like they want to see every shift point falls to the same amount of RPM. They go back, they hit the shift point exactly the same RPM. It falls to the same RPM all the way through. And I'll always tell them, I go, if it looks that pretty, it's not going to be fast. There's going to be something left on the table. And, the reason for that is probably best explained 500-inch Pro Stock. You could explain it with. Same thing with like Australian 400-inch Pro Stock, stockers, stuff like that. You really, if you completely lock up the tire, if it's dead hooked, and you completely lock up the clutch, there's only one variable left, and that's the engine. And everyone knows at that point, the only thing that's going to limit my ability to go down the racetrack is that engine's ability to accelerate. That's what's going to determine my ET and my mile per hour, is how much horsepower the engine makes. So, a lot of guys, they think in the bracket racing world where they want to be consistent, they deadlock up the clutch, they put an oversized tire on it, and they think it's going to be deadly consistent.
Right.
And then they can't figure out why it's not. They can't figure out why that guy out over there that's working his butt off, tuning his clutch, getting slippage and doing everything, and out.
It's still killing him. Yeah.
And the reason is really simple. And everybody here that, I think listens, to this pretty regularly is they're used to talking about EFI tuning. You're used to worrying about how the engine responds. And in our world, Pro Stock car, when we get out, and I'll just tell you, most Pro Stock cars, we don't touch the 4-link. I mean, they are, once we find a happy spot, unless we change tire or stock.
It stays there. Yeah.
Right. We're pretty much, we got our happy zone. We might have a couple little tweaks, but we're not changing it very much. So when we get to the racetrack, most of the time, we're not even going to have a transmission sitting in the car. We're not going to determine what transmission, what ratios we're going with until we see what the correction factor is. And explaining to everyone correction factor and how that affects your tuning is one of the most important things that I spend doing in terms of when I do clutch tuning seminars, because I tell them, if you have a weather station and you go out there and you're just going off of DA, you're just going off it's 1,300 feet, 2,000 feet, whatever, you're losing a lot of what information there is in terms of how your engine's going to react.
Right. Like water grains.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, huge.
So if we go out and we know that we're running last week in a 104 correction factor, and this week we're in 107, you can actually do a mathematical equation and say, if I was running a 230, I'm going to have to run, let's just say, a 235 to have the same amount of leverage, so to speak, on the starting line for the horsepower correction. So we can do that and know what that change needs to be. The problem is most guys out there, they got, my sportsman guys, they got one transmission. They're not changing ratios every run or even every race. They've got what they've got. But if you know that, the point back to it is if you dead hook the car and you dead hook the clutch and you're just letting the engine do all the work, if you go out there and the weather changes just a little bit, and it doesn't take a lot to change, the engine acceleration rate changes dramatically.
Sure.
So
Yep.
their consistency goes down. So being able to slip the clutch and let the engine, basically go ahead and rev, get into a point in which it's making its maximum, peak you want to keep it, let's just say, between peak torque and peak horsepower.
Right. Yeah. Happy RPM range where it can pump and move air efficiently and apply torque. Yeah.
Right. And so basically, that's just kind of a thing where there's several different factors in the clutch world that we look at that are very important. Some guys are really, really, really hell-bent on this thing's got to last for a long time. Like they don't. And I understand sometimes it's a one-man band, there's two guys or whatever, and they do not have the time or the luxury of pulling
of maintenance.
Right. Right. And that's what I've got some of my a lot of my guys that they go we got them run 80, 90 runs, and they'll pull it out, we'll freshen it, put it back together. It's a lot of guys just about fell over. They were always used to. I had one of two things. I had guys that would run 80, 90 runs on an old style. And to tell you stuff about long style clutches, most of your old Hazes, your McLeods, your old rims, some of those
your
that
Dodge
were out,
pickup truck, yeah.
They always use really thin heat shields, things like that, rivet on. That's very popular still. They're still new. You can buy them new like that, and that's great for an entry level guy. But as they start trying to learn, like a lot of my stuff, you'll see has segmented heat shields, which means there's 6 pucks on there that are bolted on. They're way thicker than the heat shield would have been if it was rivet on. That's for expansion and contraction, because the worst enemy to a clutch is heat. And I don't care if it's on a street car or if it's a race car. That's going to affect its consistency. It affects the friction coefficient. It makes everything act totally different. And so keeping that the same every run, that's why, like, if you ever look at Top Fuel stuff, that's why when they have clutch disc problems or they have floater problems or, different things like that, so often it is because the disc starts gaining either too much heat or not gaining enough heat. And whenever that happens, it changes its friction coefficient.
They have a happy spot as well as with regards to temperature. Yep.
Correct. And that's basically, a big thing. And that's why I tell, a lot of my guys that are wanting to, tune the clutch world. It's one of these deals where once you get in there and you get to playing with it, you'll find that it's not as much work as a lot of people think it is. And all of a sudden there's a lot more maximum potential. It's one of these things where I can't tell you how often I get guys call me up and they say, I've been racing an automatic in a bracket class for a long time. I just want to shift gears. I just want to have fun, and I'm not really trying to poke fun, but
no. But that's the request some of these guys have, and the more requests, more broad base you can honor, right, or help out, the better you can do it. It's like, all right, yeah, I'll put you something together that's not going to be the greatest thing ever, but it'll last a whole bunch of runs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I watch, some of this stuff, how do I say this? Some of the in-car runs, and I'll look at data, and I'll have different stuff, and I'm not, God, I hope he's not listening. I'm not trying to pick on Troy Coughlin. But, I remember I watched an onboard video one time, and it wasn't me picking on him. I just watched the video, and I was kind of like, I was sitting there watching like one of my in-car runs, and I'm pulling, 4 levers, in like, 3.8 seconds, I'm in high gear. I've got hit all the shifts just perfectly. And I'm watching his run. It just happened to be a almost same camera view.
Computer hit the shifts perfectly for him.
I remember he drops, he basically lets go of the button. And as soon as he lets go of the button, he takes his right hand up, puts it on the parachute handle. Right. And I'm just kind of like, and he rides it out the whole way. And I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, I'd have to have popcorn. I'm like, what do I do? But it's nothing. That's just where the class went. Yeah. And people don't realize, to be competitive, turbo cars are a thing where there's so much power. It's kind of like, I think Frank Manzo said it years ago. I remember being in Qatar one time, him saying it was, a stick car will always be faster than an automatic car if you know what you're doing. To a point, you get to Top Fuel funny car, we're not putting a 5-speed in a funny car.
Right, right.
It's just past the point of it's 1-to-1, let it go. But, if you're talking about that type of deal, you look at Zappia, who just, he's, running the clutch and like blowing everybody away. And it's just a thing where the reason for it basically just goes back to understanding the overall picture of it. And the biggest thing that was lacking for years, and that's why I spent time putting like long style type clutches, diaphragm clutches with the counterweight levers, things like that on the dyno, was because I realized that I had that information, but everybody else wasn't privy to it. So that's where I started making spreadsheets, things like that, putting it out there, giving it to everybody, putting it on the message forums, things like that. Just simply because once they realize they have a data logger, and they can look on their chart and they say, you know what, I've got 3 turns of base in it, and that's 500 pounds of static base pressure. And I can say I've got 36 grams of counterweight, and the clutch locked up at 7,000 RPM. They can walk down that spreadsheet and go, okay, 7,000 RPM, it's this many pounds per gram. And they multiply it out by how many grams. It gives them total pressure applied by counterweight. They add their base to it. They know exactly how many pounds of pressure it took to lock that clutch up. So if they want to move it up to 300 RPM, back to 300 RPM, they can do that.
They have that control. Yep.
Correct.
Man, and if you have an engine dyno graph, instead of chassis dyno stuff, I've gotten to work with a few guys like Kale, not many. Most of my crowd, this is high level stuff here, folks. But if you have real engine dyno data, then forget ever needing a chassis dyno. If you can work with a clutch guy at this level, and you can say, hey man, at this RPM, I'm down 6 horsepower. And you're familiar with the engine, and you're just focused on that. Clutch guy can take that and just do stuff with it. He can move things around so the engine spends as much of its time during a pass in the happy RPM range. He looks at means and modes and things like that. And it's just having that data is so key. I've been writing, I think the second one just came out, but I've been writing for the last 6 or 7 months articles for the NMCA digital guys. So race pages, fastest street car magazines, and talking about data gathering. And you know what? I'm going to do one article with you guys here in the next month, I think, on maybe gathering data for clutches and looking at data and stuff like that. Maybe I'm definitely going to your next seminar, especially if you have it in this neck of the woods.
Definitely.
I'll be a happy paying customer for that. Because just the stuff you can learn from these guys about what can be done with the power that you're making is a big deal. And it's interesting. You're actually, I know we talk a lot about turbos and torque converters and stuff like that here, but you're actually among good company. Dahlquist is a naturally aspirated builder. He's an Engine Masters guy. We've faced off with Kazi and got our asses kicked multiple times. And then we've got Brad Nagel is sitting on here. Yeah, he's on tonight too. He's won Engine Masters. He's actually beaten up on Kazi a couple times. They go back and forth a bunch. But he worked with Bischoff. He's also worked with Bob Book. So we got guys on here that understand the struggle and that max effort when you're trying to squeeze out the last 0.1%, and you don't have a wastegate knob to put a quarter turn into and be like, well, screw it, I don't have problems anymore.
You're exactly
I'm
right.
sitting here wondering how I can run a Lenco with a clutch behind a turbo motor and still street it once in a while.
Hey, talk to Larry Larson. He's getting her done.
Oh yeah. That's actually, that's actually a doable thing though.
It is. It totally is.
It's really a thing where what people don't, the only thing that I try to use a really good example is a lot of my guys, go out there and the only thing they have to understand is they always say, well, you have a clutch tune, or you have a street tune, and you have a track tune. Yes and no. The only reason that I tell people to change it for on the street means we put more static pressure and more counterweight on it for when you're on the street. The only reason that we're doing that is just simply because when it's on the street, you don't really, it's a race car. It's kind of a built race car that you're driving on the street. It's it's overkill. So what you're really doing is you were just saying, we want you to lock this thing up because we got centered iron clutch discs in it, blah, 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 things like that. We don't want to wear the stuff out. So when you're driving it on the street, if it has a lot of clamping force, it's going to be a little bit like an on-off switch when you're taking off from a dead stop, things like that. But that way in the gear shifts and this takeoff thing, in those positions, it's basically not wearing itself out. And then, in situations like with the Lenco stuff, the great thing about Lenco stuff is, and I tell so many of my street guys, especially drag week guys, I tell them run it as an air shifter, and the reason is I'm talking throw a 5, 10, 15 pound nitrous bottle in the back of that thing full of CO2. It's all we shift them with the Pro Stock car. You put a 15 pound bottle in the back with CO2 and it's going to last for a hell of a long driving time. And that allows you to do several different things. As far as from a track perspective, you could do this. I would never recommend it on the street, but most people don't realize your AirPods actually have if you ever look on the sides of them, they'll have little threaded holes in them. And most people don't even know what they're for. They have no clue what that threaded hole, they understand why the hole's there because that's where the air evacuates from, but they have no idea why it's threaded. And the reason is you can actually put Holley carb jets in there to slow down or speed up how fast that shifts. So you have clutch packs inside of a Lenco that you can, like if you were to pull it manually with a lever rather than air, you can slowly shift or you can do it really quick. The only problem is, of course, is if you do it really slowly enough times, you're going to burn through clutch packs. But that being said, it is a Band-Aid. It's an option. Plus, when you have a turbo application, you can always ramp in timing and boost just a little bit. And I don't like for people to do it a lot, but sometimes we might do it a little bit in gear changes, things like that for the street, just so it's maybe not quite so violent. But it's very doable. Like I was saying, Pat Miker with, 2,400 horsepower and, on a street, with a billet clutch and a Lenko is exactly what he had. And he ran that thing and it, did great with it. For the first time out, I can tell you right now, had he had time not being in Canada to go test, et cetera, I think he would have run even stronger. To get back to something you mentioned there in terms of, that I did want to touch on in terms of like engine development, some of the things that people look at, it's kind of funny. A lot of times, the two of the people that I do, of course, everybody knows I'm really, of course, tight with Kazi, but somebody else that I do a lot of work with, of course, is also a good friend of mine is Darren Morgan. And Darren, as everybody knows, he's damn good at what he does. And the interesting thing is we can all be good at, you've got to be well-rounded, say in the Pro Stock Pro Mod, the world we're living in. You got to be fairly well-rounded. But am I a top-end specialist? Am I going to be developing cylinder heads and cams and blah? No, that's not.
No, this is why I don't do paint and body work. But go ahead.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. Do I have a working understanding? Do I understand, air signal? Do I understand, the different things about it? Yes, I do. Because I've spent enough time and enough money trying to, learn it, that I've got a good gathering, and I've had good teachers. But it's nice whenever I can go back to Darren or Kazi or this, that, or the other, and we're working on a different manifold, or we're working on this, that, or the other, and I'm saying, hey, on the racetrack, the car really needs to move my peak here. I need to move this here. I need to do this. I need to do that. And what it allows for us to do is communicate together as far as they can give me we can tweak little things to give me what I need for maximum performance. And I hate to say it, probably the thing I'm the most guilty of, and everybody always laughed. My dad was actually the one that always tells everybody, and I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, is, he said, Kale's got a clutch dyno sitting here. He's got all this latest, greatest, cool stuff. He's always coming up with things. He's like, the one thing he never worked on was our own Pro Stock stuff.
Yeah. Thanks, Dad.
And everybody said, well, for the amount of money we spend, what we, accomplished was, like, wow. But at the same time, it was a thing where, the customer comes first. That's what I'm there for. And don't get me wrong. I want to win every time I go to the racetrack. But when I come home, I got paying customers that want to do, that's what I'm working on, So,
most of us have the same problem on here as well.
Right.
Yeah. Our own project cars, some of them are just not that impressive.
Right. It's kind of one of those things where, I got Tinsy sitting beside me, and she's sitting here raising her hand going, yeah, no kidding. She's got her Fox body sitting on the rack above my Pro Stock.
Oh, we got to get that finished. Yeah.
Yeah, she's ready to kill me because the entire back hatch is literally just full of sponsored parts for her car. And, me breaking my neck didn't exactly speed things up any, but, she's sitting there looking at it going, there's nothing wrong with it other than we need to put some new parts on it. So,
right on.
But no, I think back to the whole thing is with clutches. We've got a lot of guys, I'm sure, listening that are the problem with clutches, you have such a mix. It's not like the automatic world where it's street and strip is so it can be and usually is fairly similar. They're not having to make big changes to go from one to the other, so to speak.
Right.
In our world, there's not necessarily big changes. It just depends on what your level of intensity is going to be. Meaning, are you going to want to tune this? In other words, try to get all you can, or are you happy with saying, hey, I've got a fast car that I want to put a diaphragm clutch in. As long as I ain't going through it all the time, I'm happy. So the thing I would probably the information I would probably disseminate, and I'm not going to speak ill of any clutch company on the planet, but just for many reasons. But I will say this: there are manufacturers that I think. I get on a lot of these forums, and people like I have customers, ask me to get on somewhere to maybe educate some people or show graphs or even street stuff that they just need a little bit of help, just a little guidance. And I'll take a little time, and write a little article, this, that, the other, and kind of give them, information. But the biggest problem that I see is that in the clutch world, Transmission stuff is kind of becoming the same thing with the people that are reworking, Tremec transmissions that aren't G-Force Liberty, people like that. You kind of you got to really watch out for snake oil, rebranding, things like that, because most of the companies that you see advertising all over the place in terms of street stuff, they really are either, there's very few people that make all their stuff in-house or make anything at all themselves. And some of them are bigger companies than you'd think they are that do that. And, it's kind of a thing where what they'll do is they're basically rebranding the same thing over and over and, painting it a different color. And there's nothing really that great about it. If you call them and ask them, what kind of pressure it applies, what a different shimming height, would do to their base pressure, what kind of friction coefficient they should run, et cetera, they're going to rate a clutch at horsepower. And, I'm going to tell you right now, that is the most improper way to do that. And they do it a lot the same way. And I'll beat up on some, I'll use a couple of people that I'm good friends with that own fuel system companies. And you guys will relate to this. I always beat up on Bub Miller, Steve Matuzik, and Robbie out there at Magna Fuel. I always give them a hard time, but it's like, you rate a fuel system for horsepower, and it's like, if it's an EFI system, like, you really can't do that. It's like, how much pressure does the damn thing have to carry? If it's, it's kind of like a Coyote engine, the thing's got to carry 54 pounds of pressure. But if you got a pump that will only run 60, it's almost maximum duty cycle all the time. So it's kind of the same thing in the clutch world. It's like, if you say it'll hold 650 horsepower, okay, great. But is the engine turning 5,000 RPM, 8,000 RPM? Is it got a slick on? How big a tire does it have on it? Does it weigh 3,000 pounds or 4,000 pounds? What kind of ratios do we have in? All that makes a big difference. So buying a clutch off of what it's rated for horsepower is usually
bad idea.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
that's the problem with, I think, the majority of street guys, like the majority of the people that still run a stick, like our average guy that is listening to this show is probably running a turbo LS with a T56 behind it. And all they know is, does it hold the power or does it not?
That's right. Me. Yeah. Well, and I'll tell you something right now. I probably am letting this cat out of the bag, maybe a little prematurely, but I was actually talking with Mike and Leonard at G-Force here recently, and we're looking at actually doing something with the Magnum to make it. Let's just say it came across my attention probably a couple of years ago, shortly after my injury, after my accident, and I was kind of looking at stuff, and I was looking at a Magnum, and I'm just kind of going, like, man, there's a lot of stuff we could do in here. There's a lot more room. There's some things we could do, but I need somebody that is in that market that can service it. Whereas I kind of had the ideas. I kind of know which way we need to go, but that's not what I do all day, every day. But what I realized was I'm getting more and more and more guys calling me up saying, I've got 1,200, 1,500 horsepower, something like that. And if you put a T56 Magnum with right now the best thing that you could buy on the market currently, an upgraded deal, you'll get, say, $4,000, $4,500 in a really, really reworked, Magnum. And it's basically probably only, you get up around 1,000, 1,200 horsepower in a, say, 32 to 3,400 pound car, and you dead hook that thing, you probably got a pretty good chance of, damaging it after just a few runs. But we're working on.
I have experience there doing that, so you're exactly right.
I think there's a lot of people that have experience with that.
And I've looked at something.
Can I ask a question here, Kale?
Sure.
When I'm dealing with my customers that run clutches, there's one is the street and strip guy that wants to drag race it once in a while, and we'll use a lot of clutch that will dead hook it, but we allow tire spin to take some of the shock out of the drivetrain and to prevent it from pulling the engine down too far. But so we're using wheel spin to limit driveline shock and to keep it from stalling the motor. The other way would be to do it with a long style clutch with an adjustable, base pressure. To the guy who's in a 3,800 pound street car with a T56, what do you say to him, whether he's nitrous or turbo, as far as longevity versus performance?
It really depends on what their quote unquote, always ask them, how many miles is usually what I ask. How much real street use is this going to get? And I will put this disclaimer out there. I helped do some development stuff on clutches that we've done for Shelby and different people that, everything from their 750 horsepower stuff up to their 1,000 horsepower, deal. And, I've watched guys that, for lack of better words, they can screw up a cast iron piss pot. I got a guy that can go out there and put 1,500 miles on it and completely torch it. I got the other guy that can go out there and put 30,000 miles on it and it looks fine. That there's a little bit of a give and take there, but it really kind of depends. I've got a lot more of my guys running my newer, later, greater, next gen, or my special long style type clutches on the street, and they know that they're at a level of performance that once a year they're going to pull the clutch out, they're going to send it to me, we're going to surface everything, put a disc in it, send it back to them, they're going to go again. If they get to that point, there's kind of a threshold break over there. I think, Steve Winningham is a customer of mine that, he's got an LS. I was just talking to him at PRI that, I won't lie. It kind of has a regurgitation thing in my brain is, he's put an LS in a Fox body Mustang. I'm a Ford guy. It kind of hurts, but, he performs very well with the car. The car runs low nines. So, it's a decent horsepower car for the weight it is, for what it is. He's got a long style, one of my next gen clutches in it. And he put, I think, about 3,500 street miles on it. I don't know how many passes down the drag strip he put on it. But all we did was surfaced it through a disc in it and away he went. And, the next year. And so you can have the best of both worlds to be able to run a long style type clutch to take away that initial shock. And to explain to the basic listener that's not, fully up to speed maybe on the differences, a long style clutch is going to allow us to take away that static pressure, meaning, there's a few clutches on the market that are lower diaphragm pressure that use a higher friction coefficient, like a cerametallic discs, things like that are only maybe 1,800 pounds, but that's usually still too much. It's like if somebody says, hey, I've got 800 horsepower, I'm going to turn this thing 7,500 RPM, something like that. And and like you said, let's say a 3,800 pound car. They're going to put a slick on it. By going to that long style type clutch, we can go with 0 turns of base in it. We can be all the way down, say 330 or less, depending on how we set it up, pounds of base pressure with no turns in it. So I generally would start them off probably 500, 600, 700 pounds of base pressure. And then the counterweight is what's going to lock it up. That means they're going to be able to drive into it. So if they launch at, say, 4,500 RPM, with the counterweight and the base, they might be making 1,500 pounds of pressure versus that standard diaphragm they would get from a Spec, a Zoom, a McLeod, blah, blah, blah. That's just an off-the-shelf, very basic piece. Let's say, or they're going to find that that's usually like a 2,800 pound diaphragm that's like on-off. It's either you got it all at once. It doesn't drive into it. It literally, as soon as your foot comes off the clutch, that's 2,800 pounds of pressure slapping that clutch disc and squeezing it. So I
think one of the problems is that we have a lot of people who can't afford the upper end clutches that have all these counterweights. I think one of the big challenges is the normal 9-to-5 worker is probably looking at a standard clutch with a diaphragm because that's what they can really afford. They can spend maybe they can spend $1,000, maybe they can spend $1,500.
Right.
What does it take to get into a clutch that has counterweights that's going to allow them to do that? Depending on a few different variables in there, and that's the thing.
Really, with my stuff, the absolute top of the line stuff is about $2,200-$2,300 is my latest, greatest, coolest stuff. That's flywheel, the whole 9 yards. That'd be like with an aluminum CNC cut cover. That's not the stamped steel like you're used to seeing, like a soft lock or something like that. It's a lot. Let's just say that's like what Winningham uses. That's what all my guys that are out there really beating on them use. The stamped steel stuff is a little bit of a different animal in the aspect that the only thing I don't like about stamped steel, other than maybe some of the maintenance is a little bit bigger pain in the butt in terms of setting the lever heights, things like that you have to do with shim stock rather than just break a nut loose and adjust it where you want it type thing. It's just ease of use. But it has to do with we are bound with the physical constraints of how big that stamped steel cover is. So if you were wanting to get into, say, a regular long style that's got the nice segmented heat shields, this, that, and the other, and all that, we can do the 10-inch, 10.5, 11-inch style clutches. You're going to be more around, say, $1,900, something like that. Once again, that's going to be complete. That's a flywheel, because that's everything. When I build clutch systems, I don't really care to build just a pressure plate. Somebody's going to go, throw on a stock flywheel. You have to set everything up correctly, meaning the ring height, because if the ring height's not set right, that means the levers aren't going to be set the same. If the springs are, coil or bound a little bit more than they should be, that means you may have more or less base pressure than you should have. If the levers aren't set correctly, in other words, we build everything based off of how you're going to run your application. The diaphragm guys you're talking about, that's the thing. Most of the guys, and this is what I guess I kind of say, is I like whenever everybody listening, if you're ever going to call me, please just don't ever say this when you call or ask this question. Can you give me a clutch that will save my engine or save my transmission, my rear end, my axles, and everything behind my clutch? The answer is really simple. It's no. And the reason is because if I do that, the clutch is going to be gone, and you're just going to be unhappy that the clutch burnt up. So it's 6 1, half a dozen the other. But that being said, I usually tell people, like, if you've gone out and put a T56 in your car, I know you went out and spent over $3,000 to do it, minimum. But, plus a drive shaft, plus a bell housing, plus.
Oh, that guy spent $13,000 on his wheels, Kale.
Well, there you go.
We get that same problem too, but I don't want to spend the extra money for the Dominator.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And so I would say this, that there's nothing wrong with diaphragm clutches. The thing that comes up fairly frequently, and I've had this conversation with almost every clutch manufacturer, clutch mine, my what do you want to say, my different components within the world, why OEM, why do we have diaphragm clutches? Why in the 60s if you went back in the 60s and you bought a Mustang, you had a long style or Borg and Beck style clutch in your car, which meant it was a coil spring base pressure clutch with 3 levers in it. And the question that you have to ask is, why do we have diaphragms and everything now? Well, it's really a 2-part answer, but it's both of them based around the same thing. It's money. And the reasons is, one is physical constraints within the bell housing, meaning they can put 2 discs in there with a diaphragm in a shorter area, which means they don't have to spend as much engineering money. The second reason is the diaphragm spring itself is way cheaper. Problem with diaphragm springs is they do wear out. Heat cycles do make them weaker over time. And generally, in order to do that, they run an organic disc in it, which, as anybody has ever run a regular street car knows, it works great if you're putting it in a little Honda Civic and you're going to run it up and down the road all day, every day. But if you start putting it in a Mustang, a Camaro, whatever, that's making, 600, even 500, 600, 700, 800 horsepower, and you're beating up on it on the street, you're taking it to the track, it's not going to hold up very long. So you're going to
smell terrible. Right.
And the first thing you're going to do is you're going to call up whoever it may be. And yeah, you can get it. And here's the point I'll probably make. A lot of people always ask me, they say, what is the difference between certain clutches in the diaphragm world? And one that's a company that, like I say, I'm good friends with Pat Norris. His stuff at Ram would probably be the easiest, because they kind of have a little bit more simplified version of understanding their catalog. Is the only reason I'm choosing them to as an example. They have what they would consider their stock replacement clutch, which is almost the same thing, just a little bit better than what you go to O'Reilly's and buy. But it's basically the same principle. It's basically what came out of your car. Then you're going to have an upgrade. You're going to have like an HDX. Then you're going to have an HD. And then you're going to have, a twin disc, and you're going to keep going up the line. But they say, well, what's the difference between looking at that stock replacement clutch and, let's say, their HDX, which is the next step up? And it's really kind of simple. The pressure ring is a little bit better material, and the diaphragm has maybe a little bit more pressure, and maybe they've upped the friction coefficient, meaning they've gone away from a pure organic disc to give it a little bit more friction coefficient, just so that it can handle, instead of 350 horsepower, it can handle 500 horsepower. Or something along those lines. Once again, we're going back to rated by horsepower, which I don't really prefer, but to make it, to make the conversation simple, that's the way to go. That's the problem with diaphragm clutches. Diaphragm clutches are something that's kind of gotten forced onto the market, and everybody doesn't really know that there are other options out there. If you could put anything in your car at any point in time, a coil spring type clutch that's like a long style, a billet clutch, a Borgenbeck, whatever, that's better because it allows for more even distribution. The heat cycles on those types of clutches, or those springs, are more like die springs, like what you're used to seeing in like a big dies, stamping out parts. Those springs are made to have, hundreds of thousands of cycles. They're made to get hot and cold. They don't lose their pressure over time. A diaphragm does. So it really is one of these things where most people just are going, hey, I had a diaphragm clutch in my car. I've got to put a diaphragm clutch back in it. Then you get into a whole other bag of worms of, is it manual linkage? Is it cable linkage? Is it hydraulic? And people always ask me that. They go, what's the best? And I said, it really boils down to this. If you're street driving the car and it's got a lot of horsepower and you're wanting a lot of clamping pressure, yeah, the hydraulic's great so it doesn't wear your leg out. It's great. But if you're at the drag strip, it's the worst. It's never going to release exactly the same. The temperature of the fluid in the hydraulic lines is going to change. There's just too many more variables.
On the hydraulic part of it, I've seen some of this stuff around before, and I don't know how much success anybody's ever had with it, but timing the release of your clutch using restrictors on the hydraulics, like, bypassing it for the clutch by a cylinder like that. Have you ever done anything with that? And is that just like a snake oil type thing?
Yeah, it's really what I consider that. It's kind of, I don't want to call it a Band-Aid thing. It's almost kind of like the Linko thing I was talking about where, the air can evacuate and, it's kind of like shifting it slower or faster. In other words, it's something that you can play with. I usually tell my guys that are drag racing with a hydraulic, I tell them I want that thing literally to the moment they drop their leg off that clutch pedal. I want the orifice of that thing to evacuate any and all hydraulic, fluid that's in there immediately. I don't want any kind of taper. I don't want any kind of restrictor. I don't want anything like that in there that's going to slow it down, because that's what's going to allow you to have the most consistency. Usually the guys that want to slow them down a little bit, it's kind of like, I'm going to make fun of a guy because he trolls me on the internet like crazy. He's a guy named Weed Burner. The Hillbilly slipper clutch, screen door slammer special. Most people
screen door slammer. Sorry.
Yeah.
I should have been muted.
That picture.
But it's like $169.99, and you can put a screen door slammer on your clutch, and you can make it run just like a Pro Stock car. And I'm like, sure, yeah. But the best way to put it is I'll give him credit. The concept's great. The problem is we did it years and years ago, and it got banned in several classes, and it was way more advanced. We were using pneumatic air bleeds with Digiset timers to control pedal's position, so we could bleed it off. We could even make it where a micro switch on the shifter, like when you pull the V-gate shifter back into second gear, the micro switch right before it actually shifted would go, hey, we're going into second gear. It would send a little signal out there, and it would momentarily blip the levers like onto the on the clutch to take away just a little bit of pressure, to absorb the shock.
Wow.
So that stuff's out there. It can be made for street strip cars. We could do it. I mean, I could probably make a fortune building them again, but it's a thing where it's still kind of a Band-Aid, if that kind of makes sense.
So you'd rather just leave the clutch tuning up to the actual tuning the clutch itself versus the mechanism to actuate it?
Right. It sounds like it's more complex to try to bleed a hydraulic rather than dial a clutch in itself.
It is. It's just an inconsistency factor, and the fact that the reason I make fun of the screen door slammer is because it's kind of like, hey, this thing was made. I mean, let's face it. I'm not trying to be racist, I guess you'd say, but I'm not trying to bang them on the Chinese. But let's face it. I'm pretty sure the factory in China making all those things that are holding our screen doors, open as we walk through them. I'm gonna say quality control for the tolerance and the valving and all that probably isn't that high. So if you take it in that perspective and you multiply it with the hydraulic stuff is the same thing. It's the air temperature is going to change, the humidity is going to change, the barometric pressure is going to change, how hot it is inside the car, how far it is out in the RAM. All these things are going to be things that are going to affect it. And really, this is getting off the deep end. But to explain this, everybody always wants to know, why do Pro Stock teams come back every single run, pull the clutch out, cut the clutch discs, and swap the tires, do everything that we do. And there's a reason. Can I go up there? I mean, I used to do it. I've done it many times when we got, rain coming in, this, that, and the other, in the old IHRA, days, this, that, and the other. And it was a thing where we would just, Tinsy throw we have a special deal to cool the clutch down in the car, and we zero the stands in the car, in the clutch, with the clutch still in the can. You got 15 minutes, basically cool it down, reset your clutch, get your fuel in it, get back to stage lanes and go. And I'm going to run fairly close, but I'll probably run 2 or 3 hundredths off where I should be, just simply because of a little bit of an inconsistency factor. And that's what we do with Pro Stock. Is every single thing about why we do what we do in Pro Stock is because we're trying to go back to the starting line with a clean slate every time, exactly the way it was the last time we were up there. So that's back to what we're doing. We're taking inconsistencies out of a car. And that's what hydraulic is, kind of a little bit of an inconsistency issue. Most of my guys that are bracket racing don't have a ton of problems with it. If your heads up racing, it's definitely a little bit of it holds you back a little bit. It's because simply it's going to delay your reaction times off and on. There's going to be an inconsistency there. And then that's when it'll affect, you start seeing 60 foot times be a little bit, fluctuate, because the clutch maybe doesn't get what I call the shock, the initial, we can actually get clutch slap. To try to explain that is, we run what in the clutch world we call it air gap. Air gap is when you push the clutch pedal all the way down, you've got a positive stop behind it.
Yep.
That's
very important.
Exactly. And to make it for somebody who's not used to understanding it, we measure it a different way. But what it would mean is, if you push the clutch pedal down and you could take a feeler gauge and slip between, let's say, the disc and the flywheel, it's how many thousandths can I put in there? That's your air gap. So on a single disc clutch, most guys are going to run, let's just say, 45, 50 thousandths of air gap. But if you get somebody that starts running up around 100, 110 thousandths of air gap, what happens is it actually gets clutch slap on the release, which means it kind of shocks it. It has a momentary deal where it hits it so hard that it actually, you'll see the drive shaft spike and then drop right back down, and then the engine's having to try to reaccelerate it again.
Yep.
And you'll see that even in Pro Stock cars once in a while.
But not enough air gap, and you'll bog everything, gets fucked up then. Yep.
Yeah, or you get to pull through the beam. You ever watch a Pro Stock car or a stick car of any kind staging, you watch them pull through the beams, meaning they rev it up and all of a sudden the car just starts moving. Pretty much, I would say 90% plus of the time, that just means that there wasn't enough air gap.
Right.
Basically the clutch was touching, the disc was getting touched just enough that it couldn't hold it. So, that's all those things are variables. When we come back after we put the clutch all back in the car, everything's buttoned up. The last thing we do on a Pro Stock car is there's 2 things you do. One is you set your air gap, and the last thing you do is you set your 2-step switch. Our 2-step switch, what that means is, we hold it at a certain RPM on the launch.
Yep. Clutch switch. Yep. We go at the air gap and the clutch switch with the feeler gauge every single pass on the Pro Stock car. When it goes back together, those are all set.
Yep.
And that's a big deal. Somebody fucks that up, you see it in the data logs right away. Car leaves all jacked up if the air gap was off even just a little. Yeah.
Right. And don't get me wrong. I will say this. A lot of guys get off the deep end worrying about air gap and how it responds. And this goes back to the question about the hydraulics versus cable versus, direct manual linkage. Everybody kind of gets a little off the deep end in terms of saying, I'll just say on my mountain motor Pro Stock stuff, when I was driving, I ran about 45 thousandths air gap. That was perfect for my application. Some guys, I could run 45 to 55, and honestly, between everybody here, it didn't really affect my reaction times that much. Some guys have it in their head that if they're running 55 and they squish it down to 40, they're going to go from running an 050 light to an 020. It's mental. I can tell you right now, 10 thousandths and that thing is not going to pick you up, 3 or 4 hundredths on the tree. Just not going to do it. But at the end of the day, it has to do with the consistency factor. Doing it the same way every time is what, if you do things the same way every time, you take really good notes. I don't care if you're racing an automatic or a stick. The more notes you take, the more information you gather, and, you sit at home and you go over it and you look at it and you think about it, it's going to really enlighten you. And I can't tell you how many guys I have that maybe, I guess you'd say, or maybe the older generation, that aren't really computer savvy, but I get them to go ahead and they'll say, I want a billet clutch. I can't tell you how many times I've got a guy who'll call me up and say, I want to buy a brand new, let's just say a $3,000, $4,000 clutch unit. And I'm like, yeah, don't get me wrong, that would help. But they say, I don't have a data logger. I'm like, you need the data logger before you need the clutch. That data is so important to you. And the fact that once you learn what your car likes, how it's responding, there's a reason. The only thing I will tell you about Pro Stock guys, and I always joke about this, most of them, you give them more knobs, more switches, they're going to turn them and they're going to flick them and they're going to get lost so fast they won't know which way to go.
Right.
But at the same time, if you have rear shock travel sensors, in drive shaft speed, things like that, Excel Gs, you're going to be able to see. It's not just a video. You're not just watching to see how, hey, the car looked like it squatted and we put white chalk mark on the tire. Yeah, that's great. I still video my car and watch it, but the data that we get after the run is so important because I can go, wow, the shock, instead of going down 0.7, it went down 8.5 of an inch. Went down 0.85.
Right.
And
so we hit it hard.
Right. And I'm like, wow, I really needed more wheel speed. So when I go back up there, I've got several options. I can stiffen the compression of the shock. I can keep it from going down quite so much. I can just hit the tire a little bit harder. I can rev it up a little more, let it have a little more clutch a little earlier. There's a lot of things I can do to control that wheel speed. And if I can get that wheel speed to happen a little more quickly, it doesn't give the shock as much of a chance to bury. So, all those things are important. And, a lot of times I would say that probably one of the most important things I could tell most people that are listening to this, whether it be street or strip or pro stock, pro mod, whatever it is, you have to look at what load your engine, your car, your combination wants. And when I say that, I mean that in the aspect of when I'll use a pro stock combination as an example. When I started working with Australian pro stock, and most people, just to tell them the difference, from a 500-inch car, they're 50 pounds lighter. They weigh 2,300 pounds. They're a 400 cubic inch motor. Most of my customers now down in Australia run 680s, 690s pretty consistently. And the biggest thing that I taught them over several years was it was gear splits. It wasn't the clutch. I mean, the clutch was a big factor, but it was the gear splits.
It's a real big deal on a small inch motor too, right? I mean, they're doing it all with RPM.
Right.
Yeah.
If you ever limit that thing's ability to accelerate, it's done. So we would always, the 1-2 shift would be really tight, and they were packing 124 fourth gears, and I started putting 130, 133, 134s in the fourth. And they were just like, oh my God, when they plugged fifth, it sounded like, it's, honestly, oh man, it just thud, and they'd come back and they'd go, they thought it was a bad run. They see their time slip, and one of them was, a guy went a tenth and a half quicker than he'd ever gone. And he couldn't believe it. He's like, how does the time slip say that? It felt so bad when I plugged high gear. And the point that I made was really simple. And this goes all the way down to cars that are 400 horsepower, whatever you want to say. The heavier they get and the less horsepower they get, this becomes more important. Whenever I do that and I stack those gear ratios like that, I have to make the clutch be able to slip down low and in the gear changes so that it doesn't keep the engine from being able to recover. And in doing this, there's something that the car has and when it shifts from fourth to fifth that it doesn't have in the 1-2, and that's ground speed. Meaning, if it's got ground speed, the engine can recover more easily than it can whenever it's bogged down in the 1-2 and the 2-3.
Sure.
So your guys out here running T56s or whatever, you look at it, the problem that's kind of stinks with the T56, and this is something that, Mike Long and I were talking about, there's some things we're going to try to work on. There's options out there to change ratios. Tremec has a very limited option. Basically in the T56 Magnum world, you got a 266 or you got a 297 low gear. That's your options. That's not very, that's kind of a big spread, not to mention your other ratios. And let's face it, a 6-speed, you got 2 overdrives, which are basically worthless in drag.
Right. Yep.
So, we've got a lot of other options out there, but that's where understanding that clutch technology, understanding how the gear ratios affect you, things like that, there's a lot to be gained.
And I think probably the thing that probably would throw people the biggest loop, I get this pretty consistently, is a lot of guys think that, calling me, they think, okay, he's a pro stock guy. Everything he does is super top, high, top of the line, this, that, and the other. Not really true. I mean, don't get me wrong. We do a lot of the top of the line stuff. But I've been that guy before, cutting my teeth going, God, I just need a little bit of help. I just need some guidance. And so often, I spend time with somebody and say, hey, I don't want you to buy a new clutch. I might want to refresh their clutch, so they're starting off, or maybe update it a little bit, things like that. I'm not trying to, go crazy, but a lot of times I look at it and go, I would really rather you spend $600 changing some gear ratios, or I would a lot rather you buy a different tire or a different shock, just basically because that's going to make your performance better. Once you get to that point, then let's get some information, go back, and then if you want to make a clutch purchase to get the better thing, we can do that. But
speaking of that, a lot of the guys that I would say are listening are probably T56 racers. There's a real limited, gear set, options, for that particular transmission. Is there anything you would suggest, for different type of applications to look for, or are we just kind of bound to what there is?
It kind of depends on your perspective and what your build is. I'll say this: a lot of my guys that run the T56, I actually have a lot of them. Depending on how much horsepower they're making. I've got a lot of my guys, I actually go tell them, say, hey, have you considered a 4-speed with like G-force, like a 101A, something like that? The reason for it is because you're already basically running a 4-speed with 2 overdrives anyway. By going that route, most people just aren't, they're not really thinking about it. They don't consider it because they look at it as a 6-speed to a 4-speed. But the thing that I tell them is like, okay, if you're cruising the car, if this car is a car that you're going to drive halfway across the country, I understand putting a 4-speed with a 1-to-1, high gear may not be your thing. But if you're wanting to go out and take it to the racetrack, that might not be a bad opportunity, because now I don't have to run a 297. I can run all the way up to like a 340 something first gear, or I can run down as low as a 260 something first gear. And I can make all my gear splits the way I need them. Plus, it's going to be a hell of a lot stronger. And if you want to, you could run a V-gate style shifter instead of an H pattern. So, if it's a race only thing, you've got that. That's also a good street strip transmission, as long as you've got somebody that's not trying to go out there and, throw it in overdrive and drive, 1,000 miles with it. The T56, that's why I say we're working on that. I want to try to come up with a few ratio options, because there's really no reason not to have more than what there is. There isn't. I usually tell everybody. Go ahead.
Yeah, just going off the top of my head, there's like a 301 first gear gear set that you can get. Then there's obviously the 297, and then 266, and then I think you've got like a 221 first gear gear set you can put in it as well. So I mean, it's kind of a real narrow range of ratio sets that you have to choose from in those. Now it's kind of limited too, because the stick shift craze, at least for like the LS stuff, it seems like it's really skyrocketed the last couple of years. And there's a lot of records and stuff like that people are chasing as far as H pattern T56 stock style transmission deals, and it really limits you to that particular transmission. So trying to dial in a 12 or 13 or 1400 horsepower car with that limited constraint really puts bearing on clutch tuning and all that. So
do you have a way? I have a question on like the T56 style stuff. Is there a way to have like a secondary external actuator so that you have your initial slip, and obviously you have your weights or whatever, but you can also manually lock it at a certain point down the track? Like, say you want to allow it to slip with I guess what you were saying, a long arm style, and then have a way where you can actually physically actuate like a lock.
Right. You're basically looking at what, if you ever get into like digging in, most guys in our world aren't really educated, might be the best word, I don't know, or diverse on what a lot of guys call the lockup style clutch. I'm not an overly large fan of it because there's some better ways to do it, but it works for a lot. It's very, very popular in your import type stuff. Your guys that are running trying to give you an example, basically, let's just say your 2JZ, your Mazda, your stuff like that, the Titan guys, so on and so forth. Carlos, and some of those, they run, they're running some stuff that what they basically do in those cars is at a certain point, it's got a hydraulic actuation, or it has another set of levers that are held that at that point they release it, and it basically throws that much more pressure on it to where it's a complete lockup. The issue with somewhat doing that, and it's not usually necessary in applications like what you're talking about, and I'll kind of explain the reason, fairly quickly, is if you're making 1,1300 horsepower, 95% of the time it's with a turbo application on a street motor. So unless, don't get me wrong, I've got my guys that call me up and they built a Kazi Boss 9, or whatever, and yeah, they got tons of cubic inches and the thing makes over 1,000 horsepower naturally aspirated on pump gas. Most of those guys have got a Linko in it. They're basically just, they're torque monsters. But with anything where you have like a boost type of an application, if you take a T56, and I'm sure everybody here knows, you take a T56, you go up to the starting line with 1,200 horsepower, and let's say you don't make 1,200 horsepower at your launch RPM, but you're still probably making 800 or 900 horsepower, and you put it you put it down through a slick that is, for the most part, dead hooking. Maybe not dead hooking. It's a controlled spin, but let's just say is hooking up fairly well. You're going to find that T56 is probably going to be sitting in pieces, sitting on the starting line. So how these guys that set these records right now, and I've got several of them that got got different clutch stuff that I've done that are out there running them. I've got guys run T56 stuff, and sevens and this, that, and the other. But the only way that they get there is their 60 foots are atrocious. It's one of these things where they go 130, 60 foot and they run 7 seconds in a quarter mile. And I'm just sitting there going, good God, if I ran with a naturally aspirated application, I go 130, 60 foot, I'm going to run nines, but it's because they have so much horsepower to pull, to pour into it after the car gets moving. And after the car gets moving, it's easier on the shock of the transmission. So what you're talking about.
The reason why I was asking, because I have a customer that is doing a T56 in a Supra application, and he was talking about potentially doing a slipper clutch setup because he's making, I think the turbo he has is probably good for around 1,700. Obviously, it's a 2J, so they don't make any torque down low.
Right.
But I wasn't sure if there was a way to do. Being in the T56 housing, it's got to be really a pain in the ass to go in there and make adjustments to the clutch between runs. But I was thinking if there was a way where it could be mechanically actuated, from the outside, I could easily write a control strategy to do that, to move an actuator to gradually lock it or unlock it, going down the track versus just doing it with weights.
Right. Yes and no. You can do what I was talking about would be using and basically a pneumatic actuator that was on timers, kind of like I was talking about earlier. There's ways that you could do that so that you could allow it to have way too much clamping pressure. And basically at that point, what you're doing is you're running it like a Top Fuel funny car deal. It's kind of staging it in is basically what you're doing. But this is the next thing, like when I was talking, say with Mike, we were looking at, making some better, T56 type parts. Is we were talking about the front facing on those things, on a Magnum, basically the front bell housing being, a cast aluminum piece part of the transmission. There's no reason that has to be that way. There's no reason we can't make what we would call an aftermarket bell housing that would mate to a T56. And I've already spoke to Brian Browell about that. It's something I anticipate whenever we start doing that's going to be an upgrade. Once that becomes possible, then we'll have an inspection window on it, so you'll be able to run a clutch that could, SFI certified, that would be safe, and be able to actually get to it to tune the damn thing.
I think there's something like that already out. If you look at like the aftermarket Magnums rather than the production Magnums,
right?
They've got a proprietary front plate that has the bolt-on style bell housing steel.
Right.
And at that point you can just get something like a quick time or whatever bell housing that has a window in it that you can access the clutch.
Right. Well, and that's the only reason we were looking at making a piece like what I'm talking about has to do with trying to, because here's the thing, there's actually quite a bit of room inside of that, the way, the stock piece. So, I mean, it's not as much as I would like, but it's for guys that are used to basically they've already got everything set up to run a T56. We don't want to have to put, say, a bell housing in there and move everything back. That's going to change everything. So, that's why I was like, well, what if we just made it where it was more of like, an adapter, if that makes sense. There's no reason to not be able to do it. And it really, the cost effectiveness wouldn't be that bad. Either way, at the end of the day, getting in to be able to tune the clutch, I mean, that's the biggest problem. When you can't get in to tune it, and it doesn't even matter if it's a diaphragm or it's a long style, if you can't shim it, on a diaphragm, or you can't go in there and change the base and the counterweight, things like that, you're kind of up a creek without a paddle, because otherwise, at that point, you're sticking the clutch in there that you have to just basically put something in it that is enough to hold it all the time. And what you were basically talking about doing is what I was talking about with the pneumatic way, is basically what you would do in that situation is you would run it with the easiest way is to run it with a clutch arm, a fork, rather than run it off like a hydraulic. And once you do it that way, what you actually do is you actually have basically a pneumatic cylinder that is going to run your pedal, if that makes sense, or the actual arm coming out the clutch fork. I
got you, and then you can just use some sort of control in ECU to basically regulate clutch slip as you release it.
Right, and then we've done that. So I mean, we've done I was messing with that stuff 15 plus years ago. Most places have outlawed it in all the class racing, like where we would have used it. But and I mean, I'll be honest with you, I really felt it should be. I don't think anything like even the screen door slammer, things like that, I don't think in heads up classes like that, they really don't have a place, because I mean, it's kind of like pro stock. It's saying, it's like one of those deals where if the driver needs an aid, the drivers, should move on. It's just kind of those deals where, that's part of tuning a car. It's knowing what you're doing. When you drop the clutch, either you're tuning and what you've done is right or it's not. That's kind of important. It's a crutch. But for the kind of applications you're talking about, you don't have all the cool things that we've got to work with. You don't have different ratios. You don't have different, adjustable clutch. You don't have all those things. So by running that pneumatic cylinder, running that clutch fork, you can now tell if it knows how far out it is. In other words, you can set it to where it knows that this is the point in which the throwout bearing first makes contact with the levers. Then you can say, this is the point in which I want you to extend to, so that you know exactly how many pounds of pressure for it to take off. And you can make it do it off of a micro switch on the shifter. You can do it off of, and let it stay actuated for however long you want it to do off of like a Digiset timer. It's really not that hard to make. The problem with it is a lot of guys go, what's the cost? And you can make them for a couple grand. You can make them really, really fancy for like $3,500. But it boils down to, it's kind of, that's where I don't like it, because it's like, okay, I'm spending all this money and I could just put a real clutch and a real bell housing in it and have even better, if that makes sense.
So if you use a mechanical arm versus like a hydraulic actuator, right, the travel is going to be pretty consistent. This is a question. Sorry. Is the travel going to be pretty consistent from being fully disengaged to where it starts to grab? Is that going to change a lot with temperature and RPM and all that stuff?
The great thing about pneumatic versus hydraulic, and I figure I'm trying out the best way to put it. Let's take the pneumatic part of it, and let's say we're running a cable or a manual linkage. That's going to be very, very consistent. I don't like cables only because they stretch over time, and that's their biggest inconsistency issue. But at the same time, it is still a mechanical style of actuation. That's going to be the most consistent. But if you throw the pneumatic cylinder in there with a fork coming out the side, the thing that's interesting about pneumatics over hydraulics, yes, air temperature does change, but It's the same thing as if you were to go out to your air compressor and it went up to 100 psi and shut off. It doesn't matter if it's 95 degrees in the summer or it's 30 degrees in the winter. When you blow when you push your blower button to let the air out of it, it's probably not, the air does not exit at that much of a different rate than it does if it was fluid, meaning hydraulic. So, 50 degrees in hydraulic and fluid can make a big difference on how quick or slow it moves, versus pneumatic, it doesn't affect it anywhere nearly as much. So that's going to give you a more consistent way of doing it. The only trick that you've got there that you have to keep in mind, a lot of guys, to do the pneumatic, of course, at that point you are running an air bottle, in the car that is going to eventually run out. It's something you got to replenish. But at the same time, the biggest thing that I get is guys that try to do that, try to run 150 pounds of pressure. That's usually not enough. They usually need 300 or 400 pounds of pressure if you're running especially a long style, like counterweighted clutch, because it's kind of like my mountain motor car. When I rev that thing up to say 5,500 RPM and an 830 inch motor, at 5,500 RPM and 160, 180 grams of counterweight on there, it's trying to put my knee through my mouth. It's everything we can do to hold on to the thing.
Right.
So, you guys don't have that much pressure. I mean, you're never going to have that kind of pressure, but you're going to need to have quite a bit. And what you would do at that point would be the pneumatic, cylinder would basically, on the digiset or the micro switch, however you had it, let's say it comes into the 1-2 shift, when it would have a micro switch that would be on your shifter, especially if you're running V-gate. We've done this with the H pattern stuff before. It's a little bit of a convoluted way to make it. We haven't done one for quite a while, but you can do it. But it basically is saying that right before you shift or right as you shift, it's going to go up. It's going to take your throwout bearing. It's going to put it right up against the diaphragm or the long style levers, wherever you want to say. It's going to go up to the clutch, and it is going to depress the clutch only how far you want it to basically give it just the amount of slip that you want it to have in the gear change, so that you don't see the drive shaft spike. I've got.
So if we're using like a dog engagement transmission and we can pull power on the shift,
right?
If it's all being controlled by the computer, do we still necessarily need to disengage the clutch on the shifts? Or have you seen that been done successfully just by managing the power, through the shift?
The problem you can, but the problem that you will see is if you're backing out of the throttle, just ever so slightly to shift a gear, that is, if it's counterweighted clutch, that helps. A diaphragm clutch, it doesn't help. And for the most part, there are some, counterweighted diaphragm clutches out there, but they don't, the ones that, what's out there, it's literally like 20%, of your total clamping load comes from counterweight, versus if it's a long style, it's 20% is static and 80% is counterweight. So when you go up, let's say you shift at 7,500 RPM and what happens is when it falls down, let's say it's going to fall down to say 6,000 RPM in the gear change, basically that with a counterweighted clutch means it goes from 7,500 to 6,000, the clutch does. So therefore, it loses that much pressure because the counterweight is losing 1,500, RPM. So the counterweight falls out of it. With a diaphragm clutch, it doesn't. It's the same thing all the time. So basically, you're going to get that tire spike regardless, because when you pull that gear and that engine tries to reaccelerate, it's basically going to bark the tire, if that makes sense.
It has that built-in inertia from being at 7,500 RPM. That it's got to pull it down for the next gear, so it has to send that energy somewhere.
Right. But I guess what my question was is like with like a dog style trans, when you shift, you're basically cutting power going into the shift that you can delay how the power comes back in after the shift is complete. So so you still have that little bit of inertia from the motor, but you're not really under like power, like active power during the shift. So in that type of situation, will it be, do you think that would mitigate the flare enough to where it's manageable, or do you think you still need to be able to, release that clutch?
I think you're basically, what you're talking about doing is something that Let me give you an example, and I think I can make it really clear. Our old class I used to run was Hot Street and NMRA, or Street Bandit, whatever, all motors, small block, 28, 10, 5 tire, ladder bar cars. We had to weigh like 3,200 pounds, 400 cubic inches, making, let's just say, around 875 horse. The long story short with it was, no matter how great I had the clutch, no matter how perfect I had it, I could get it to lock up 60 foot, 119, 120, which was pretty stellar back, 12, 13, 14 years ago. But the problem with it was no matter what we did, we couldn't get, when we shifted, we couldn't get it to lose enough RPM just how we wanted to not spike a 28, 10, 5 tire, meaning I'm always going to see that drive shaft is always going to have a little spike in the 1, 2 and the 2, 3. So a way that we would always, a lot of times, band-aid it was, of course, we could pull timing just a little bit at the right point to minimize that gear spike. You're kind of basically talking about doing the same thing. Meaning,
yep. Power torque reduction real quick. You can do it with throttle. You can do it with spark cut.
Right.
He can do, he's got the controls to do it a bunch of different ways.
But the only thing that I ever found with that, though, and this does have a bit of a difference in between naturally aspirated, turbo, all those things, and also has to do a lot with gear ratio and tire size, meaning what is the car's ability to disrupt the tire in a gear change. If it's got a great big tire on it and it's not making that much horsepower, it's probably not going to be a problem. But if it's a small tire, a lot of horsepower, especially the more RPM you get, the more that managing it that way is a little bit of a trick. Basically what I'm saying is it leaves a little bit on the table because when you take out timing, when you take out any of the stuff that you're talking about doing, basically, regulating its ability to reaccelerate, generally what you're going to do is you're going to find that it's actually going to knock off efficiency because the engine has now been kind of retarded for a momentary amount of time to where the car loses forward inertia, a gain of inertia, if that makes sense. And I'll give you an example. And you guys are probably going to like this because now I'm going to be talking about EFI and Pro Stock. Years ago, and I think everybody in Mountain Motor figured I was going to be the first one when they opened up, fuel injection to run it. They figured I'd probably be the first one. One, I was younger. Two, I had already run a 700-inch motor, with 8 throttle bodies, and basically back in 2005, they figured, hey, he's probably going to be the one that's going to try it. I was used to it. I tuned it a lot with other customers. But what we found with naturally aspirated applications is something that will, I think, translate very well into what you're talking about. When you got, when you put a 17.5 to 1 compression Pro Stock engine out there, that's got a gear shift, and I'm having to regulate an EFI system, and let's say that, I set certain parameters. I say it can only have an O2 from here to here. It can only correct timing from here to here, pulse width here to here, all those things. I can only tune it in so much. And when we went out and we started playing with it, allowing it basically, to go to, a closed loop system, let it correct itself, let it do what it's supposed to do. The car slowed down 0.3.
Yep. We had more luck tuning them open loop and not letting any closed loop stuff change in the Pro Stock cars.
Right. But you would think that, the advantage, where is that advantage to be had with EFI? Theoretically is the fact that it could eventually be closed loop so that, most people think about a carburetor on the starting line versus my dad always made this comment, and, it's his 79-year-old wisdom, but it's right. It's just simplified. A carburetor is right on the starting line or it's right at the finish line. It's never perfect at both ends. And that just has to do, especially when you throw, say, a hood scoop, forced air, blah, 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 things like that into the equation, all that changes. So the point that I'm making is theoretically closed loop is what we want. If we could get that to where
it would still make power too. There's a lot of factors. It's funny. We saw this in Pro Stock. There's a lot of other factors. It's not, the EFI won't just by itself give you a power advantage over the carburetor setup, especially something as well developed as what you're talking about.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's real tough to run with the carburetor guys, frankly, because their shit's so well developed. There's changes in manifold, changes in intake valve and exhaust valve, event timing, individual cylinder tuning, things like timing the injection vent at the right time so that more fuel ends up in the chamber instead of spit back up in the plenum. There's a bunch of shit that we're just catching on and learning about how to make them run with the carburetor guys, truthfully.
And, and I mean, I'm not going to lie. I mean, it's kind of funny. I really do. I mean, not to get off, off topic here, the 500-inch guys, everybody always asks me, they go, what do you think about, because they know I work with, different clutches, doing different stuff with all the different, pro stock stuff, so what's my opinion? I said, I hate to say it. It's like 500-inch is kind of just going in a way that's not beneficial for any of them. And it's not a path that any one team chose. It's not something anybody chose. It's just a path that's not advantageous to growth. But when I say that, I really mean that with, it's kind of like with mountain motor. Most people a lot of guys don't really know what the difference was. With mountain motor pro stock, we made it where you can run carburetors or EFI, run whatever you want. And the funny thing about it is both combinations have won. The carburetor still has the mile an hour record. And consistency in the championships is coming through the carburetors. That being said, everybody's asked me, they go, if you were going to go EFI, what would you do? And what I didn't like about the 500-inch rule, and I understand this is bureaucratic politic / sponsorship money in your pocket thing, that you got to make the decisions you got to make. NHRA, whether people like their decisions or they don't like their decisions, they have to realize that they are in business to make money. They're not there to make the racer happy. That's
sure.
The end of the game.
Yep, exactly. I mean, they got to make money to be able to keep having the events for us to do that stuff. So yeah, I do respect that. Yeah.
And so the thing I didn't like, and I won't like, is all of a sudden you've got to run a Holly box. Okay, let's face it.
Oh, don't get me started. Here comes some letters from the attorneys. Go ahead.
Does Holly stuff work great for street strip applications, guy? I mean, it's a good basic system. And it's nothing wrong with it. It's just one of those things where there's people out there. I'm pretty sure most EFI tuners would agree that if you could put anything out there that's on the market currently in terms of the main productions, you're going to go with a Motec. You're going to go with something that's going to have the absolute most controllability, the fastest processors you can have. You're going to want the most magnets, pickup sensors.
Delgado just woke up.
I've been trying to tell these guys this for ever, and they never listen to me.
Wah, wah.
I'm on it. It took a guy with carburetors still on his pro stock car to make the statement. It's sad. But that's the thing. I don't even understand. In mountain motor, everybody runs the big stuff. And I'm just kind of looking at them going, literally, I mean, I don't have anything against big stuff either. It's actually really forgiving.
It's simple.
The turbo world and the power adder world, man, I don't blame them for going that route, because that little bit of extra you need to gain, it doesn't matter. But when you're the problem that I found playing with everything I've ever done with naturally aspirated, stick shift, even automatic version stuff, with when it has to shift, the high compression of the engine and what our flow rate and everything is in the manifold and everything, when you disrupt it, that processor literally cannot take enough readings from the air coming in, the exhaust going out, and everything to correct fast enough. And so all of a sudden you're targeting, say, 13.2 for your optimal O2. All of a sudden it's 10 to 15, and it bounces back and forth like a needle that's lost its way. And literally 2 or 3 tenths before you get ready to pull the next gear, it finally finds 13.2 again. You pull the next gear, and there it goes again.
You just need to let me work with you on your next EFI Pro Stock guy. That's the kind of stuff that I get brought in to try and sort out what's going on there and why. And I mean, my pushback is it's not really always the processor. A lot of times, there's just a lot of things you got to look at. But I've spent the last couple of years helping try to resolve issues like that and found some interesting stuff. But yeah, no, you're right. In the end, my argument, and half our guys are going to agree with you entirely, and some of the others are going to say, one ECU, its job is to open an injector and close it, fire ignition at the right time. I mean, beyond that, every one of them should be capable of doing that. Yeah. Now, I mean, you're right though. There were some things about the Holly that we didn't like at first, like the rev limiters. The clutch guys were committing suicide over the deal because they'd sit there on the limiter and bounce 700 RPM. They're like, well, what the hell RPM are you going to leave at? that's a big deal. That's a big window for a clutch guy, huge window. So,
well, and to bring it back, here's really my situation. And when I say, when I brought the processor into it, I was really meaning more from back in when I was playing with it back in, let's say, 05, 06, when we were using like an XFI.
Yeah, different story back then.
Right.
Yep.
Those things were literally so slow. It was just like, okay, I was like, come on, man.
It's nowadays it's not the processor is the problem. It's the strategy. It's how the logic is written. It's how it handles things. It's how things are calculated in the background. And there is a significant difference between, say, like an MS3 Pro and a Motec, or a Pro FI and a Big Stuff 3. There are huge differences. While they look alike on the surface to most people that they're doing the same thing, how they get to that result, it's so different that it really does make a difference in how the engines run.
Well, it might, but my thing would be, you just got to show it. It's got to show up as an ET gain or a mile per hour gain on the track, and that's when people will buy into it.
It is so funny. What you just said. This is something that this is what I hit on. This is why, whenever Kazi looked at me, they were, hell, Mahovitz was the one actually calling me when they first allowed that. And he's like, Kale, I'm going to send you whatever you want for throttle bodies, blah, 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 blah. Go run it. Because, he knew I'd already done it. And I'm like, I don't want to. And there's a reason. And it's really this. And this is why I actually wanted to get you guys wound up on this to make a very distinct point. Is when we were sitting I've watched, in pro stock ranks before EFI was ever allowed. Within the mountain motor world, we had certain teams, and let's just say they usually did not excel very well. And when they came back to the pit, they weren't pulling the transmission out. They weren't changing ratios. They weren't worried about the shocks. They weren't worried about anything. But by God, were they changing, main jets, and they were changing air bleeds, and they were changing the spark plugs. They were doing everything, but here's what they're doing, working on the wrong end of the horse. Because here's the point I'm trying to make. How much, let's just say if you're in the ballpark, let's say you can run, let's use, everybody's really used to the 500-inch pro stock stuff in terms of their ET mile an hour, things like that. How many guys have you watched go out there, and if you can run within 1 mile an hour, you can run the same ET. And my point of it is when I came back to the trailer for my stuff, I always realized everything behind the engine was where I could gain more ET than what I could sitting on a laptop 24/7 doing all the tuning.
Yeah, I've been taught that lesson too. I've been sitting there and trying to tune in and the last 5 horsepower on something when a guy will make a change on the exhaust side and pick up 40 horsepower real quick.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those things where that stuff is important, but really where is EFI important? It's important on the dyno. It's important when we're making a new manifold. It's important when we're changing a throttle body. It's important when we're trying to find horsepower. But when we're at the racetrack, it's just one of those things for us. If I've got to spend 10, 15 minutes going in and remapping stuff or changing timing, changing different parameters, to make it do what I want it to do to try to gain, because let's face it, if I know I can change it and I can get it a little better, I'm going to try. What's going to happen is I figure out that I spent 15 minutes less time looking at the race pack graph, going over ratios, going over clutch, looking at the tires, going over everything else. And all of a sudden, next thing you know, you look up and you're going, wow, I got mile an hour and I have no ET. And that is, I think there's a couple of 500-inch teams you could look at this year that you looked at, and they started the year doing about where everybody else was, and then slowly kind of fell to the back. And they spent so much time chasing, basically chasing the wrong end of the horse.
Right. That's what everybody's been focused on the 500-inch motors for the last 2 seasons now.
Right. And that's where I guess I'm coming back to is the clutch, the ratios, all that. So often, I've got guys out there that absolutely crack me up. I got guys that call me, and I'm going to go back to the slower stuff. My guys that are running street strip cars that are running 10s, to bring back the Coyote stock deal, had a customer call me up, and I've done stuff for him off and on. He's an older guy, but basically, he asked me what with what he had, and basically I told him, I was like, he's got I think a 1432 on the back of it. The car makes 435 horsepower, turns 7,500 RPM, and basically he's like a Coyote stock car. He weighs about 100 pounds less, but maybe makes 15 more horsepower. And I'm sitting there looking at it going, why do you have that ginormous freaking tire under this car? I'm like, there's no way. And, he's like, well, I'm running 1050s. And I'm like, and they're running 10.0s. It's the thing where I'm going, they're a half of a second ahead of you. And it's just a thing where he is spending all this time because of being a stalker. He's spending all this time buying different carburetors, trying different intakes.
Right.
And I'm just kind of going, have you ever thought about, just changing, some things behind the engine?
Right.
And so I think that's kind of the thing where
it's the lesson in the low-hanging fruit, right? You should be picking the lowest hanging fruit on the tree first. It's the easiest to get. You get the most reward from the least effort to start off with. That's the problem most of these guys have at every level, is not being sure where are they going to get the low-hanging fruit from, so they go with what they're comfortable with or what they read on the internet,
Right. Here's the way I always look at it. It's really simple. And I go back to, you got to, most people don't realize, I fell out of, like I said, I fell out of the womb in terms of, I grew up the racetrack with around Ricky, around Ronnie Sox and Bob Glidden, blah, 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 Duckworth, any of them. And the point of it was really interesting, was back in those days, and keep in mind, I was a little bitty squirt. I was 3, 4, 5, 6 years old. But what was always funny was, even back then, I still picked up on it, was, that was back when a mountain motor was a 605. Then it was a 680. Then it was a 707. That was back when all of a sudden they kept getting bigger and bigger, like every year. And the point I'm making is all of a sudden they'd come back the next year. They didn't pick up 10 horsepower like we do today. Hell, they picked up 150, and they picked up a ton of torque. Well, all of a sudden the 4-link was different. The clutch was different. The ratios, everything had to be completely thrown out the window and start over. And so, what I tell everybody is that taught me something. It's like we just did right before I got hurt. Darren Morgan and Kazi and I did I've got my own head program deal for my, my mountain motor stuff. And it was a deal where we found 38 average horsepower between 7,200 and 8,200. And I'm sure you guys would know, that's my operating RPM. That I shipped at 8,200. I fall to 7 to 72, depending on how good the air is, what I want it to do.
Right.
But 38 average, I about fell over.
That's nuts. That's huge. Yep.
And it was something, Darren and, Kazi, they wanted to try it. Boom, it picked it up. Well, of course, I went to the racetrack, and all of a sudden, my car was not even kind of the same damn car. All of a sudden.
Totally different. Changing up everything. Yep.
I was like 38 horsepower can literally make this big of a difference.
We did some simple phasing work that found 25 average, and it completely threw off chassis. Clutch program took us 2 events to figure out after adding 25 horsepower.
And really, to sum it all up, here's my point that I'm making to everybody who's listening to this. It's really simple. I don't care if you're running a 12-second car or you're running a 4-second car. I really don't care. It boils down to something really, really simple. Maximize the efficiency of your car, then find more horsepower and maximize it again. It's
right.
I've kind of had a little bit of a silver spoon in my mouth growing up in terms of the cars that I've got to do, and build and everything, being able to work with really cool people. I had skinny kid cars when I was running, the 10.5 stuff, and, or in Haas cars since. But, the point I'm making is the only car I ever had was a used car, was an Escort that I had that, Charlie Taylor owned. And Kazi looked at me, one time, and I was qualifying, the first 2 years. I was qualifying like 7th to 10th, 11th, 12th, somewhere in there. But I only had an 814. Everybody else had already taken advantage of the new rules and was running like the 825s with better heads, better intakes. They were making another 50, 60 horse than I was. And I was qualifying 2-3 mile an hour down on everybody, but I was still in there. Well, the thing that I realized was real simple. When I looked at the dyno sheets, I went, we're all peaking torque at 6,400 RPM. My torque looks almost the same until I get closer to 7. If I gear this thing right and I do everything right and I maximize the absolute potential of this car, I can get more out of it. And so that's where I look at, I've had other times where I distinctly remember one time we put a crankshaft in a motor that like Kaz said, he goes, this thing should not have affected it, but it did. And we put it in, and the thing was just a pig. But we went out, and I remember I qualified with a 410 with a 0, I believe, at like 172.80. Basically, in the 8th mile for that is the most efficient run you're ever going to do. Most of the time, to run a 410, you better be running at least 174 mile an hour. The point I'm trying to make is, you go back to a guy running 1050s, 1030s, 9s, I don't care. Get everything you can get behind the firewall, then go back and try to find more, because so much more can be had. Almost everybody who calls me, between suspension, gear ratios, tire size, clutch application, data information, there's so much more to be had there that they don't even realize so often that they can put the right setup in the car, and all of a sudden it picks them up tenths, not a hundredth or two. It picks them up a lot. And it's just maximizing what you have. And that's what Pro Stock's about. So you stop and you go back, and I think that's where I have a little bit different take on things. I've driven everything from stuff that's making 400 horsepower to, working with guys that do top fuel stuff, on frictions materials and things like that. So, I've done everything from naturally aspirated to nitrous to turbo to whatever. And when you get to intake that much different data from that many different types of racing, I can honestly
you start to see patterns. Yep, you start to look across that spectrum, and you're like, all right, it works this way for these guys, and it's a little different over here. Yeah, I understand.
I've come home and actually taken stuff that I've learned in Australian Pro Stock that actually I figured out helped me in my mountain motor stuff, and it's things that you wouldn't think they would even coincide. You just wouldn't think about it. So
yeah, cool. Dude, we're way past our normal time frame, but we're okay with that. It's no big deal. I paid the extra, so we don't have the 2-hour cutoff anymore. Everybody was asking.
Right.
But man, we really appreciate having you on here. One other thing I had a question about, you could go on for a minute or two if you want. You guys are also, don't you actually sell the Ford Coyote powertrain packages as well?
Yeah, I kind of got into that by a happy accident. Brian Wolf, I will dote on this guy for a little bit, just for a second, is Brian became the director of Ford Racing. I think he became early 2009. It was either late 08, early 09. And that was when I was, the new body Mustangs were coming out in the Pro Stock world, all that. Cunningham was, working with the new, development. And Brian came along, and as everybody would tell you at the Ford Racing, they would tell you they loved him as a boss, because when he came in with dirt and grease under his fingernails because he'd been home working on his own Fox body car, the day before. He didn't come in a suit and tie and tell him what to do. So Brian came to me, and he says, Kale, we got the new Coyote platform coming out. This was in 09. And I said, okay. And we were just displaying the Pro Stock car, of course, for Ford at PRI. And he said, well, I got a problem. I said, okay, what's that? He goes, well, we got a control pack, and we got an engine cover, and that's all we got. And I'm like, okay, so what's the problem? He said, well, we don't have any transmissions. We have no front drive. We have no starter. We can buy OEM crap, from the Ford store, but the price is going to be exorbitant. No one's going to want to do it, this, that, and the other. So I said, well, why don't you private label it? He said, well, we got red tape. We can't just private label it. It'll take me 6 months or a year to even get close to it. So, next thing I know, of course, I'm calling, Rick Love, a friend of mine at Vintage Air. We got that figured out, overnight, as fast as we could possibly do it. I had Performance Automatic jump through hoops. They did. We've probably done, God, I'm trying to think. I actually have lost count. We're 450 Coyote kits probably.
Sweet. That's what I'm talking about. That's a lot.
Yeah. And everything we do is turnkey. Almost everyone, unless it's a very custom deal, it's everything from the front drive to the output shaft. It might be the fuel system, the engine, if you need engine mounts, whatever. And I kind of got into it because what it was I was used to fitting, especially my outlets in 5 days, putting a 700-inch car 700-inch motor between frame rails. I knew how to put 10 gallons of shit in a 5-gallon bucket. So, I knew all the, the different people who made the manufacturers, this, that, and the other. I got with Canton. We made oil pans. We got all these different provisions that Ford just couldn't do on, without the red tape. So we started down that road. Of course, in the clutch world, we can do T5s, T56s, whatever in the hell your heart desires, and, in the manual stuff. But that was, I won't lie, I think Tom, who owns Performance Automatic, probably when he had to come to the clutch booth, I think it was a couple years back, and gave me one of the, top sellers for them, the year awards or whatever. I think he kind of had that, what the hell am I doing, look on his face. But, I will say this, those transmissions are they're foolproof. We have yet to have one warranty issue whatsoever with the Performance Automatic, setup. And I guess the best way to put it, that whole deal is so cool because, and I actually can say the only engine claim we ever had was basically just, a self-inflicted wound is the best way to put
I
it.
was say somebody let a carb stud go flying through the motor or something. We had that happen a couple times last year.
Right. It was just one of those deals where, it was, I guess you say somebody, shade tree mechanic maybe should have gone and got some help type thing.
Right.
But at the end of the day, that's a lot of fun. It came a second business, came a whole other thing. But at the same time, I work with a lot of shops, I won't lie. If anybody wants to look at something kind of cool, they basically, a TV show that was on here this last year called Roadhawks. It's actually Kenny Hawk. You can look them up online. It's actually really kind of a cool deal. They did one with one of our kits in it that is a 68 Bronco platform. And it's actually got a track system on it. So, where all four tires would be, it has its own track system. And
yeah.
You just bolt them on, bolt them off, and it's got a Coyote in it with the 470W with like a, transfer case deal, the whole 9 yards. And I'm like, when they got done with that thing, I was literally even like, wow, that was pretty damn
It's pretty cool. Yeah. I think I seen that. Yeah.
But, no, we stay busy, needless to say, since I decided to go turtle and go from 32 to 92 overnight. Tinsley's pretty much like
you're handling it like a boss. It's almost like you guys sped up and not slowed down. You took the time that freed up from the racing program, and now it looks like you're buried in work. But I mean, I love seeing that. We like seeing that the economy for the little guys seems to be going pretty good. So it's good to see.
You'll like this. The best thing that probably ever happened was when I was in rehab. And, I just literally, it was within the first 2 or 3 days, and they got me on one of those big mats. And keep in mind, at that time, I was paralyzed from the nipples down. Nothing.
Right.
And I'm sitting there, and the one thing we figured out is they were stretching my legs up, like straight towards the air. My hamstrings all of a sudden about screamed, and my therapist looks at me. She's like,
"You felt
that doesn't hurt. You can't feel that." I'm like, "Bull, I can't feel that." But, Tinsley's sitting beside me with my phone. And she's got my laptop there with race pack graphs, and I'm looking over sideways, and she's on the phone with people. And my therapists are looking at me going, "Are you doing work? Are you doing business?" I'm like, "Hell yeah, I am. What am I supposed to do? Just sit here and stare at the ceiling?"
Right. And I got people in the field that need it, and I can do it. I can do it remotely. So yay.
Exactly.
That's good to see.
So, yeah, no, you got to keep plugging along. There ain't, like saying, until they throw me 6 feet under and I don't have a choice, I'm not going to stop. It's like people ask me, they go, "Why do you want to get back in the pro stock car?" I'm like, "Trust me, if I can, I will,
Sure, yeah.
So,
it's good to see the improvements and you're getting there. I know that the nerve damage stuff it's a 5 or 6 or 7 year trip to recover on that, but that sucks. I've been there. It's funny. I talked to Tinsley about that. I was in a motorcycle wreck and it took me like a year to learn how to walk again, but I didn't even feel my foot for 5 or 6 years. It was completely like a dead limb attached to me, just a weird feeling. But after it was 5 or 6 years and that's back to normal. But
it's amazing. I will say this, the one thing that Dr. Green, and I will thank publicly every single time I ever had the chance, was, Dr. Green, the Miami Project, and the whole Gwynn family. Having Daryl and Jerry and Joan there, oh my God, it was funny. Most people get a kick out of this story, so I'll tell it publicly. I woke up the first time after after surgery and all that, and I'd been awake for 15, 20 minutes. And the first person that I actually saw, other than Tinsley, that came in was Jerry Gwynn. And of course, they figured I was probably pretty loopy. And Jerry leans over and he looks at me and he goes, "You probably don't know who I am anymore," or something like that. And I was like, I started crying, I was like, "No, I know exactly who you are." Because it was just that feeling that I went to sleep in West Palm Beach. I woke up in Miami.
Yeah.
And I have the Gwynns there, looking over you. And so it was kind of a deal where, I'll say this, if I had a place that I was going to have a trauma, that's where I would like to have it. But Dr. Green told me, he said, "You have such a good prognosis in terms of the way your damage was done." He's like, "You're going to gain a lot, and it could be 5 years, it could be 10 years, and it's just going to keep growing." And what I figured out was, it took me 3 months to figure out what nerve pain was. I got tingling, but I didn't really have pain. And then after about 3 months, I learned what nerve pain is.
It's like Chinese water torture. Yeah.
Basically. Yeah. And I was like, well, this is definitely something new to live with, but it takes it out of you. But I just learned a long time ago, you just got to keep plugging.
Yeah. No, I'm glad to see you breaking out of it too, man. It's good to see the improvement. So, and it was a weird crash. I don't know. Is there anything safety wise you can do different, or what? I mean, you had all the right equipment. What do you think about that, in retrospect?
We learned some stuff. What we learned that was really, I guess you'd say, kind of, I don't know, you'd say a little bit interesting was and I don't like bringing it up. A little bit, about a year later was basically when Ronnie Davis, crashed and died, and his top sportsman car at Rockingham. And, it was kind of a thing where some of us, actually, I talked to Bob Blackwell, which a lot of people know, is one of the main tech guys with NHRA. And and I talked to a lot of other people, and what was interesting was I put a lot more carbon fiber panels under my car than what most people do. I have one that goes underneath my wishbone that, like, when we take the drive shaft out between rounds, you actually have to take that carbon fiber panel off off there. I have it where air cannot get up underneath the car, to really say capture it into a cavity. So everybody always kind of wondered what caused mine. Well, when I shifted, it was pushing me towards the right a little bit, but I was not in a place where I should have. I never really overcorrected. A lot of people always thought I, steered it. And if you look at the race pack graph, it tells the tale. When I shifted, it hit a bump right then and there.
Yeah.
And it dropped
really upset it, right? That's what it looked like to me. Yeah.
All 4 shock travel sensors dropped straight out of it. And it looks like it's on the ground, but it's the whole time it looks like it goes to the right and back to the left. It's basically kind of like, it would be like it was on, on black ice. It was basically just, It was just barely off the ground enough where I wasn't steering. And so basically what we learned, though, in the rollover was people always thought I broke my neck when I hit the wall, and that wasn't the case at all. I hit, the car surprisingly is like John DeFlorin, at Haas's, who built the car. John called me, he loaded the car and everything. He's like, Kale, I can have the car ready to go in 2 weeks. Kazi was the first guy in my hospital room, my dad and Tinsley. Of course, he told me he was my brother to get in. I was like, John, we don't exactly look a lot alike, but sure. But, he's like, Kale, I looked at it on the way here, real quick, because they're loading it. And he goes, I don't think you hurt anything other than the carburetors a little bit. And everybody, the whole point was, I think it was about 30, 40 grand, puts the car back together. And I'm kind of going, in 2 weeks, and I'm sitting there looking at it going, I can't move,
Right.
What we learned was really simple. When I rolled over, I was in there tight. I had a one thumbprint bruise on my chest from where my Hans dug in when I hit the wall.
Right.
I bloodied my nose in the helmet, which I didn't even know I did until afterwards. But I didn't have anything from that. I had a 2-inch crack in the top of my carbon fiber helmet, and I'm 6'5". I'm a tight fit in there.
Yeah.
I still had probably about maybe an inch of room between my head and the roll bars. I wasn't all the way up against it. But your body, being as much percentage water as it is, does move a little bit around belts and stuff. It will move.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
So when I went upside down, I landed on the roof at 2.5 G's. So I was 240 pounds, multiply it times 2.5, and basically
that's
dropped
the pressure on your head. Yep.
Right. And so it was a compression. And what I learned from it, and it's something I've been talking to several different people about, it's something we'll probably start pushing to implement in the next year or two, because it's kind of been a thing where I wanted to have a little more knowledge on how we could go about it. You're supposed to have, by NHRA rules, 2 inches head clearance between the top of your head and roll bars.
Oh, okay.
But how do you tech that? Unless you tech the guy after he's done a burnout and getting ready to stage the car, good luck, So that being said, that's kind of an ongoing issue. But what we figured out was I kind of proposed something, and it's something we've been looking at, is to put another set of shoulder belts that actually tie into your existing shoulder belts, that go down and over, because normally, NHRA rules, we have to mount the belts right behind your shoulder blades. The problem with that is it doesn't help you, your upper body. It doesn't keep your upper body from going up, in other words, towards the top of the roll cage in the event of a rollover. So we were looking at taking another set of belts, running it down that mounts basically below your butt, so that you have belts that keep you pushed back in the seat, as well as the same belts that are going over the top also keep you down in the seat. And
I talked to a Division 5 tech inspector about that.
Yep.
And the reason they don't want them going down there is because it'll compress the spine when as your body goes forward, like in a forward rec, when your body tries to slide forward.
Yeah, that's the trade-off, right?
The spine.
Yeah.
Well, and what's funny is, I've talked to several people about it, and we've done quite a bit of digging into it. And I'll tell you this is my opinion. I think ported-in seats are a complete freaking good way to get people killed. People don't understand why I say that. Most people go in older pro cars, and they throw in a ported seat. And I can tell you right now, I had modified mine so much to the point there was nothing below my butt. Like I had it almost completely carved out, because when you're 6'5", you can barely fit in it anyway. The funny part about it was, you can take someone like John Montecalvo, who I'm very good friends with. John sits with his head, he's not now, was sitting with his head almost at the same point in the roll cage as mine. Why was it? It was so he could see around a hood scoop.
Right.
So you've got that issue. And
you're tempted.
Really,
yep.
Oh, and it irritates the living hell out of me that all these sanctioning organizations, PDRA, I'm not going to lie, I'll bust on Bob and there's some of their butts and IHRA and all of them together. I'm sorry to say, you're running door cars. Raise the damn tree up. Make it where we can see the thing, where we're not trying to squirrel ahead over to the side to see the tree. But the point I was going to say is, I've talked to several of, like Dr. Green, which is, of course, very, active with Daryl Gwynn a lot. They've spent a lot of time looking at stuff, as well as some of the other, I guess you'd say, neurologists and doctors. And the comment that they made to me was, if I had had any more of that poured-in seat under my butt, meaning had I been any closer to the roll cage than I already was,
or pushed in any harder, yeah.
They said that what would have happened was, it would have killed me. No questions asked.
Wow.
It would have killed me. So as far as the belts compressing the spine, here's the interesting fact, and this is what they told me. It will break your collarbone before it'll compress your spine, long before it'll compress your spine. And if you compress your spine down low in terms of where because most people don't understand, like, where your cervical, like that's where my injury is as a C. Basically, you have C5, 6, and 7, and 8. So basically, at past 8 would be just down below the big knot, right? Right where your neck meets your back.
Right.
So basically, your cervical part of your spine is the most, maybe the most brittle, the most easy to break. So if you were to break something in your lumbar or anything like that, to compress it that much and to the point in which you could actually cause a contusion, a hemorrhage, or a complete fracture, is pretty small. The thing we always got to keep in mind is, we are trying to contain a body that is not a complete solid inside of something that is a solid.
Right. It can squish and move around. Yeah.
Right. And here's the thing I guess I look at. As far as the belts, that's why what we're talking about doing with the belts, like I was talking about, and they agree. Everybody's agreed with me so far, and we've looked at it. It's an addition. It's not the only thing. Basically, all it's going to do is keep you from being able to go up, because if you go upside down, let's just put it to you this way. I'm going to use Ronnie Wilson as an example. The poor guy got dropped the car did a bad impression of an airplane. It went up. It was however 100 feet in the air and basically dropped right on top of him. I don't care where the belts were at. I don't care how close he was to the top of that car. When you drop your body weight in a car from 300 feet in the air straight down, it ain't going to be good. So it's kind of one of those deals where you're going to break something. Choose what you're going to break.
Yeah, tons of energy's got to get dissipated somehow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's where we were kind of looking at. We have to have something that keeps us down in the seat a little bit, because that's what actually kind of got me. We don't want something that's going to keep us down. I don't want something that's like restraining you down to the point you can't move, but it limits how far you can go upward. Restrain most of your body. And like my doctor said, they go, if you'd had something that would have kept you down a little bit, even an inch, probably would have been the difference between you walking away with a stinger and walking away as I did.
Yeah.
How tall did you say you are?
6'5".
With someone as tall as you are, would it be possible to have more layback in the seat to get your head away from the roof, or does that create other issues?
I've done it in my Escort that I had. It was kind of funny. That's the car, the only car that I've ever had that I didn't build for me. And it did not have the recess in the bottom of the floor. If you ever look at some of the older Pro Stock cars, the seat didn't recess down below, like to the roll bars. It was flat, and they did it for aerodynamic. They thought it was an aerodynamic thing, whatever. And it didn't have it done, so we weren't going to reinvent the wheel. Frank Gugliotta had driven the car before I did, which Frank's 5'6", I'm 6'5", as you can imagine. It was like, putting a foot shorter person in there is a hell of a difference. I couldn't even sit in the car. We rotated the seat back in that. It made the pushing pedals and stuff a little bit of a freaking nightmare because I was not in a really advantageous way. I mean, I was really kind of folded up in there. But that being said, that's where a lot of people get off the deep end and asking, saying, hey, maybe the roof line needs to be higher. Maybe we need to do this. Well, you're not going to redo every pro stock car. And even me, I'm going to go out there, and if it's a competitive thing going, I'm not going to run a car that's got a 2-inch taller roof line against everybody else. That's just going to screw me. So, it's kind of a thing. There's other ways, but we can move the pedals forward. There's some things we can do. I fit in my car fairly well. I mean, it was made for me. I can just tell you this. Had I been able to take my poured-in seat out and run it like I used to, that just had like the little, padded thing that just kind of set underneath your ass just so the carbon fiber didn't break your butt, I preferred it. I think poured-in seats should be limited to side, basically, because the only thing that's going to save you from is if you get a side impact, and it might keep you from breaking ribs or a hip or something like that. If you get a direct shot in the bottom of the car hard enough to do anything to you, it's going to bend pipe. It's going to probably compress the entire chassis. You're probably screwed anyway, if that makes sense. That inch of padding you got in there probably is not going to save your butt anyway.
Right.
But it pushing me up closer to the roll cage definitely did not help me. I can tell you right now, they told me emphatically, had I not had that in there, I sat in the car, and I have actually got pictures. The first time I got back to my car that I actually got to get in it was about 8 months later. I'm not going to lie. It was hilarious watching me get in and out of it. But I got in it, and I sat in it with my poured-in seat under my ass, and I did it without, and with my helmet on. And you can literally tell it's about 1.5 inches up when I got the poured-in seat in it versus when I didn't have it in. So, it's kind of a thing where, I got mixed emotions about safety. You can always safety things develop after we figure out why we need them. I mean, you think about it. The Hans wasn't around until Dale Earnhardt's crash. And, you've got all these different things that our safety is born out of where we find failure. So that all being said, do I think that a poured-in seat is a completely horrible idea? No. Do I think that there's better ways to do it, especially retrofitting older cars? Yes. And you're not going to get them all off the market. You're not going to go and say that, yeah, you can't run a car that was built in 2006. That you can't do that. So what do you do to make the best of the situation? And most of it, from what I've seen so far, is really just in terms of my personal accident, what I did and what the injury that I sustained. You've got to get your head the hell away from roll bar. I'm telling everybody who's listening, if your head is touching the roll bar and you roll over, it's probably not going to be good.
Right.
You've got to have some room in there.
Cool. Interesting.
But
thanks for talking about that, man. I wasn't even sure if you're going to talk about the accident or any safety stuff, but that's a lot of people have interested in that and getting a lot of good feedback on that. So
hell, yeah, I don't mind. Everybody's favorite question is, they go, when'd you, I love the EMT. They go, when'd you come to? And I said, I never got knocked out. And they said, oh yeah. And I said, yeah. They go, what were you thinking the whole time? I go, what the hell else am I going to hit? Because I'm still running 160 mile an hour on the roof. The other thing was, I'm watching the carburetors get shorter and shorter and shorter. And the only thing going through my head is money, 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 money.
Oh man. Grinding off the top of those expensive carbs. Yeah.
But the last thing that's probably put the icing on the cake is after they get me out of the car, and thank God to Mark Kenton, who was there at IHRA, who I've known forever. And, he's the one that literally cut my head and got in there like a bear and hugged me and made sure that my neck could not move.
Yeah.
Cussing them, tell them not to cut my car up. And, basically got me out. After all that, they get me on a stretcher, put a neck brace on me, take me in the ambulance to into the return road. They land the helicopter, right at the road course. And as they're putting me in the helicopter, the gal runs my head into the other freaking door of the helicopter.
Oh.
And I'm kind of raising my hand a little bit I can, and I'm going, neck brace, neck injury. Should I have left my helmet on? And, so it was funny. So, but it was comical. So
it was good to hear about it, though. I mean, I'm glad to see that you're making recovery, and I'm glad that the prognosis for recovery is good, if not slow. It's good to see that business is jamming for you guys too. So,
Oh yeah, we got
cool.
on top of it. So.
Cool. Well, I'm going to be talking to you guys offline later on. We're going to have you back at some point, but I was chatting with Tinsy offline here. I was like, man, we need to do some webinars with you guys. I think the webinar would serve you well. You can do these interactive things. I've been doing some of these. We'll talk about them offline.
Yeah, that sounds like a good plan.
All right, dude. Well, we're going to cut you loose. Tell your wife thanks for hanging out, and we appreciate it. And all your friends that came on and all your customers that came on and listened tonight. We see it like, shit, there's like 120 of them out here. So, yeah. Thanks, man. All right. Yep. Well, we'll talk to you again. Thanks again, ladies and gentlemen. Cale Aronson from Black Magic Clutches. Check them out at blackmagicclutches.com. Check them out on Facebook, too. Easy to find. Real easy to find these guys. Lots of satisfied customers. So thanks again, dude, and we will talk to you soon.
Yep. Talk to you soon, Lynn.
All right. Bye-bye.
Yep.
Cool. Well, that was fun. Man, they weren't lying. That guy has a lot of good stuff to talk about, too. Is everybody else left on the chat? Rye had to take off.
No, we're still here.
Yeah, Scott's there. Right on. So, very cool. Well, it's funny. We don't actually have a time limit. And it's funny. We still have like a lot of people. Basically, no one hung up yet. Everybody's still listening. So, any other guys got any other announcements or anything you want to talk about before I do the housekeeping? Going once?
No.
Going twice. All right, James, I got to talk to you about these classes we got scheduled. So we've started scheduling tons of classes. Look at realtuners.com. Got all kinds of dates going on. And really, we got some different classes we're going to try working on this year, too. We're going to do some HP tuners specific stuff or some, factory ECU specific stuff at James Short's shop in April. Holly specific stuff we're going to do with Blake Hughes at 417 Motorsports in Southwest Missouri, Northwest Arkansas. That's a nice place. That'd be a good class to come to if you want to check it out. Got some more coming in Florida, working on New Orleans, but check out the schedule at realtuners.com. If you can't wait, we've got webinars as well. You can always sign up and stream the webinars and play those. They're about 2 hours long, $15 to $20, and we're getting good feedback from those. A lot of people are checking those out and liking them. Other than that, that's about all we've got going on. Thanks to the guys that have been making donations and helping us out here. It's good to go. We did the YouTube stream this time. It's our second time doing that. We had a handful of listeners on there as well. So anyway, good to hear from you guys. Thanks again to my panelists and my crew here for helping us out. Thanks again to Kale and Tinsy for coming on tonight and keeping us entertained. We'll talk to you guys again in a week.